In the hidden heart of Tenochtitlan, where moonlight lingers in shadowed corridors and the air hums with ancient secrets, there is a market where no voice dares to rise. They call it the Silent Market, a place where feathers hold more power than gold, and a single glance can seal a bargain. Tonight, a boy named Tochtli will step into that sacred hush for the first time. 14 summers old, with eyes that still chase dreams and a heart that beats like a hummingbird's wings, he will stand among the feather merchants, keepers of the night paths and guardians of sleeping wings. But under the torchlight, among cloaks woven from the colors of dawn and the whispers of the forest, a new story begins to unfold. One that will carry him far beyond the stone walls of the temple, into skies where destiny waits on the wind. Chapter 1: The Boy and the Silent Market. The torches flickered like sleeping fireflies against the stone walls of the hidden marketplace. Tochtli pressed himself against the cool obsidian pillar, watching the merchants move through their ancient dance of silence. No words passed between them, only the soft whisper of feathers brushing against skin, the gentle tap of fingers against palm, the slow nod of understanding. His heart drummed against his ribs like a hummingbird's wings. 14 summers had passed since his birth, yet tonight felt like his first breath. The silent market existed in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause between one thought and the next. Here, beneath the temple of Quetzalcoatl, the feather merchants gathered when the moon wore her thinnest veil. "Come, young rabbit," whispered Itzcua, the eldest trader, her voice barely disturbing the air. She was the only one permitted to speak in this sacred place, for she had earned the right through 40 years of silent journeys. Her fingers, gnarled like ancient tree roots, beckoned him forward. Tochtli's bare feet made no sound on the polished stone as he approached. The other merchants turned their painted faces toward him. Some bore the blue spirals of the wind god, others the golden dots of the sun's children. Their eyes held the depth of cenotes, those sacred pools that reflected both sky and underworld. In Itzcwa's weathered hands lay a cloak unlike any Tochtli had ever seen. Feathers cascaded from its shoulders like a waterfall of dreams, emerald quetzal plumes that seemed to hold the very essence of the forest, scarlet macaw feathers that pulsed with the warmth of dawn, and tiny hummingbird feathers that shimmered with all the colors that had no names. "This was woven by the moon herself," Itzcua murmured, her words floating on the incense-heavy air. "Each feather carries the dream of the bird who gave it freely. Tonight, you become one of us, a keeper of the night paths, a guardian of sleeping wings." As the cloak settled across his shoulders, Tochtli felt its weight, not heavy like stone, but substantial like responsibility. The feathers seemed to whisper against his skin, telling stories in a language older than words. Around him, the merchants raised their hands in the gesture of blessing, fingers spread like wingtips catching invisible wind. The ceremony concluded as silently as it had begun. One by one, the traders melted back into the shadows, their own feather cloaks rustling like leaves in a gentle breeze. Soon, only Tochtli remained, standing alone in the dying torchlight, wrapped in dreams he did not yet understand. He made his way through the narrow passages that led back to his family's modest dwelling. The city of Tenochtitlan slept around him, its canals reflecting the star-scattered sky like broken mirrors. In his small room, Tochtli carefully folded the feather cloak and placed it beside his sleeping mat. Sleep came to him like a soft-winged moth, and with it, the dream. He soared above the great lake, his body transformed into something between boy and bird. Below him, the city spread like a jeweled web, its pyramids reaching toward the stars like stone fingers. But it was not the city that called to him. It was the vast darkness beyond, where mountains slept beneath blankets of cloud. A shadow passed over the moon, and Tochtli looked up to see a bird larger than any temple, its wings spanning the entire sky. Its feathers were not feathers at all, but fragments of night itself, each one holding a sleeping star. The great bird's eyes met his, ancient and knowing, and in that gaze he saw his destiny written in the language of wind and wing. When he woke, the first pale light of dawn was creeping through his window. But the dream clung to him like morning mist, and he knew that tonight, when the merchants gathered for their journey, he would be ready to follow the paths that only opened in darkness. The feather cloak lay beside him, and in the growing light, he could swear he saw it rise and fall with the rhythm of sleeping breath. Chapter 2. Whispers Beneath the Moonlight. The canals of Tenochtitlan held their breath as the feather merchants prepared to depart. Tochtli knelt beside the obsidian black water, watching the reflection of torches dance like fallen stars. The city's great pyramids rose around them like sleeping giants, their stone faces turned toward the thin crescent moon that hung in the sky like a silver smile. Itzl's canoe waited at the water's edge, carved from a single cecropia tree and painted with symbols that seemed to shift in the flickering light. Other vessels bobbed gently in the canal, each one carrying a merchant wrapped in their ceremonial feather cloak, each one as silent as the water itself. The night has many ears, Itzl whispered as she helped Tochtli into the narrow boat. But it rewards those who know how to listen without disturbing its dreams. As they pushed away from the stone quay, Tochtli felt the city release them into the embrace of darkness. The only sounds were the gentle dip of paddles cutting through water and the soft lap of waves against the canal walls. Even the night birds seemed to understand the sacred nature of their journey, offering only the occasional whispered trill. The procession of canoes moved like a dream through the waterways. Ahead of them, the lead merchant raised his paddle in a gesture that meant follow the moon's path. Behind them, others responded with the sign for we are the children of silence. This was the language of the night traders, a vocabulary written in the air with hands and paddles, understood by those who had learned to see in darkness. As they glided past the great temple of Tlaloc, Itzl began to speak in the voice reserved for sacred stories, barely louder than breath, yet carrying clearly across the water. Long ago, when the world was young and the gods still walked among the reeds, there lived a deity known as Xochitla, the feather god. He was neither fully bird nor fully wind, but something between, something that existed in the spaces where one thing becomes another. Tochtli leaned forward, his paddle resting across his knees as the current carried them forward. Around them, the other merchants had stopped paddling as well, letting their boats drift while they listened to the ancient tale. Xochitla loved the night above all things, for in darkness he could see the true colors of the world, not the harsh brightness that hurt mortal eyes, but the soft hues that lived in shadow and dream. He gathered these colors into feathers, each one holding a fragment of night's beauty. A fish jumped in the distance, its splash echoing softly between the canal walls. The sound seemed to be part of the story, as if the lake itself were listening. But the feather god grew lonely in his perfection, so he chose certain mortals to share his gift. These were the first feather merchants, not traders seeking gold or jade, but keepers of dreams, carriers of the night's secret colors. To them he gave one sacred law: speak only when silence would break the heart of beauty. Tochtli felt the truth of these words settle into his bones like warmth from a fire. Around him, the other merchants nodded slowly, their faces painted with moonlight and shadow. He understood now why they moved through the world like whispers, why their trade was conducted in gestures and glances rather than words. As they passed beneath a bridge carved with the faces of water spirits, an elder merchant named Nakali raised his hand in the sign for sacred story. Itzcua nodded and continued. They say that Xochitla still watches over the night traders, that he sends signs to guide their journeys. A feather that glows in darkness, a bird that flies against the wind, a dream that shows the path ahead. These are his gifts to those who honor the silence. The canal began to widen as they approached the edge of the city. Ahead, Tochtli could see where the waterway opened into the Great Lake, its surface stretching toward the mountains like a mirror made of liquid obsidian. The sight filled him with a mixture of excitement and fear. Beyond lay the unknown paths his dream had shown him. "Tonight," Itzcua whispered, her voice carrying a note of ceremony, "we begin the journey to the cloud forest, where the Quetzal birds nest in trees older than memory. The path will test us, young rabbit. The night will ask questions that can only be answered with the heart." As if summoned by her words, a gentle breeze stirred the water around them. It carried scents that Tochtli had never smelled before: the green breath of distant jungles, the cool exhalation of mountain streams, the mysterious fragrance of flowers that bloomed only in darkness. The lead merchant's paddle caught the moonlight as he signaled the resumption of their journey. One by one, the canoes began to move again, their occupants dipping their paddles into the water with the reverence of priests performing a ritual. Tochtli matched his rhythm to Itzcwa's, feeling the ancient dance of paddle and water, breath and silence. Behind them, the lights of Tenochtitlan grew smaller until they looked like a handful of fireflies scattered on the darkness. Ahead, the lake opened like a pathway to the stars. As they paddled into the vast night, Tochtli heard something that made his heart skip, a sound so soft it might have been imagination, yet so clear it seemed to come from inside his own chest. It was the whisper of feathers moving through air, the gentle rustle of wings that belonged to no earthly bird. He looked up at the crescent moon and thought he saw, for just a moment, the shadow of something immense passing across its silver face. The great bird from his dream, perhaps, watching over the small procession of merchants as they carried their cargo of dreams into the waiting darkness. The night embraced them completely, and they became part of its ancient song, a melody written in paddle strokes and silence, in the soft breathing of sleeping water, in the whispered prayers of those who had learned to trade in dreams rather than gold. Chapter 3. The Man with the Blue Beak Mask. 3 days into their journey, the canals gave way to rivers that wound through jungle thick as green dreams. Tochtli had learned to read the language of water, how it whispered warnings around hidden rocks, how it sang lullabies in the deep pools where ancient spirits slept. His paddle had become an extension of his arms, moving through the current with the fluid grace that marked a true night traveler. The jungle pressed close on either side, its canopy so dense that even at midday, the light filtered down in scattered coins of gold and green. Vines hung like the hair of sleeping goddesses, and somewhere in the emerald depths, howler monkeys called to each other in voices that sounded almost human. It was during the afternoon rest, when the merchants had pulled their canoes onto a muddy bank overgrown with cecropia trees, that Tochtli first saw him. The man stood at the edge of a clearing, where butterflies danced in shafts of sunlight. He was tall and lean, draped in a cloak that seemed to be woven from shadow itself. But it was his mask that made Tochtli's breath catch in his throat. A magnificent creation carved from blue-painted wood, shaped like the beak of some mythical bird. Turquoise feathers crowned its edges, and obsidian eyes stared out with an intelligence that seemed older than the jungle itself. The masked figure made no sound as he approached, his bare feet finding purchase on roots and stones without disturbing so much as a fallen leaf. The other merchants looked up from their meal of corn cakes and dried fish, their faces showing no surprise, as if they had been expecting this encounter. Itzcua rose slowly, her weathered hands forming the gesture of respectful greeting. The man in the blue beak mask responded with a sign that Tochtli had never seen before, fingers spread like wingtips, then drawn together over the heart. It was a greeting between equals, between those who understood the deeper mysteries of the feather trade. Without speaking, the masked man reached into his shadow cloak and withdrew something that made the air itself seem to hold its breath. It was a single feather, but unlike any Tochtli had ever seen. It glowed with its own inner light, shifting from deep blue to silver to gold as it moved. The feather seemed to pulse with life, as if it contained the heartbeat of some celestial bird. The man's obsidian eyes fixed on Tochtli, and though no words passed between them, the young merchant understood. This was meant for him. But what could he offer in return? His own collection of feathers, carefully gathered and traded over the past months, seemed suddenly ordinary, earthbound things compared to this fragment of captured starlight. Then he remembered the story his grandmother had told him before he left Tenochtitlan. The tale of the boy who traded his shadow to the moon for a single perfect dream. It was just a story, she had said, but stories were the most valuable currency in the world of the night traders. Tochtli stepped forward, his heart drumming against his ribs. He began to speak, his voice soft as falling leaves. And in the time before time, when the world was still learning how to dream, there lived a hummingbird who fell in love with the morning star. Every dawn, she would fly higher and higher, trying to reach the light that called to her heart. But no matter how fast her wings beat, no matter how far she climbed, the star remained beyond her reach. The man in the blue beak mask tilted his head, listening with the intensity of one who collected stories like other men collected jade. The other birds laughed at her foolishness. "Stars are not for the likes of us," they said. "We are creatures of air and earth, not fire and void." But the hummingbird continued her daily flight until her feathers began to shine with the reflected light of her beloved star. Around them, the jungle seemed to lean in closer, as if the trees themselves were listening. Even the butterflies had stilled their dancing, hanging in the air like living jewels. And one morning, the star took pity on the faithful bird. "I cannot come down to you," it said, "but I can give you a gift that will let you carry a piece of my light wherever you go." And with that, the star breathed upon the hummingbird, and her throat feathers became a patch of pure fire, ruby and gold and copper, holding all the colors of dawn. Tochtli paused, watching the masked figure's reaction. The obsidian eyes seemed to glow with approval. From that day forward, all hummingbirds have carried the fire of the morning star in their throats. And they say that if you listen carefully to their wings, you can hear the whisper of starlight, the song of love that bridges the gap between earth and sky. As the last words faded into the green silence of the jungle, the man in the blue beak mask stepped forward. With movements as graceful as a dancer's, He placed the glowing feather in Tochtli's outstretched palm. The moment it touched his skin, warmth spread up his arm and into his chest, as if he had swallowed a piece of the sun. The masked figure bowed once, deeply, then turned and walked back into the jungle. Within moments, he had vanished so completely that Tochtli might have thought him a dream, if not for the feather that pulsed with gentle light in his hand. Who was he? Tochtli whispered to Itzcua as the merchants prepared to resume their journey. The old woman smiled, her eyes crinkling like ancient parchment. Some say he is a priest of Xochitla, the feather god. Others believe he is one of the first merchants, blessed with eternal life to guard the sacred paths. But I think, she said, helping Tochtli into their canoe, that he is simply what we all become, if we listen to the night long enough, a keeper of mysteries, a bridge between the world of dreams and the world of waking. That evening, as they made camp on a small island thick with flowering vines, Tochtli carefully wrapped the glowing feather in a piece of soft cotton and placed it beside his sleeping mat. As darkness settled over the jungle like a gentle hand, the feather's light dimmed to a soft pulse, like the breathing of a sleeping star. When sleep finally claimed him, Tochtli dreamed of flying through a sky filled with glowing feathers, each one a story waiting to be told, each one a bridge between one heart and another. And in his dream, he heard the whisper of wings that belonged to no earthly bird, carrying him deeper into the mysteries that awaited on the path ahead. The feather pulsed gently beside him all through the night, keeping him warm as a mother's embrace, reminding him that some gifts are given not for what we have, but for what we are willing to become. Chapter 4. Feathers that sing in the wind. The mountain pass opened before them like the throat of a sleeping giant. For 2 days, the merchants had followed a path that wound ever upward, leaving the green embrace of the jungle for the thin air and rocky slopes where only the hardiest plants dared to grow. Tochtli's lungs burned with each breath, but his spirit soared. Never had he seen the world spread out below him like a tapestry woven from cloud and shadow. The wind here was different from the gentle breezes of the lowlands. It moved with purpose, rushing through the narrow canyon with a voice that seemed to carry messages from the realm of the gods. As it struck the feather cloaks of the merchants, something magical began to happen. At first, Tochtli thought his ears were playing tricks on him. A soft humming seemed to rise from his own cloak, so faint it might have been the whisper of his own blood. But as the wind grew stronger, the sound became unmistakable. His feathers were singing. Each plume caught the air differently, creating its own note in an ethereal symphony. The long Quetzal feathers produced deep, resonant tones like the voice of the earth itself. The smaller hummingbird feathers sang in high, sweet notes that danced around the melody like children at play. The macaw feathers added rich middle tones, warm as firelight, while the tiny feathers from wrens and finches provided delicate harmonies that wove through the music like silver thread. Around him, the other merchants had stopped walking, their faces turned upward to catch the wind. Each cloak sang its own song, and together they created a chorus that seemed to make the very mountains lean in to listen. Nikali's cloak, heavy with the feathers of eagles and hawks, sang in bold, soaring notes. Itzcwa's ancient garment, adorned with feathers from birds that no longer flew in the mortal world, produced haunting melodies that spoke of times long past. "Listen," whispered Xochitla, a young merchant woman whose cloak shimmered with the iridescent feathers of tropical birds. "Do you hear what they're singing?" Tochtli closed his eyes and let the music wash over him. At first, it seemed like random beauty, notes scattered on the wind without meaning. But gradually, patterns emerged. The songs were not chaos. They were paths, directions written in melody and harmony. "Ah, the birds remember," said Itzcua, her voice barely audible above the singing wind. "Even after their feathers are taken, even after their spirits have flown to the realm beyond the sky, they remember the paths they once traveled. The wind awakens these memories, and the feathers sing the way home." An elder merchant named Tlakalel stepped forward, his weathered face creased with wonder. He was known among the traders for his vast knowledge of the old stories, and now his eyes held the light of recognition. "And my grandfather told me of this place," he said, his words carried on the singing wind. "He called it the Pass of Remembered Flight. He said that long ago, when the world was younger and the barrier between earth and sky was thin, the birds would gather here to sing the paths of migration into existence." As if summoned by his words, a shadow passed overhead. Tochtli looked up to see a great condor circling above them, its massive wings catching the mountain thermals with effortless grace. The bird's cry echoed off the canyon walls, and for a moment, it seemed to harmonize with the singing feathers. The legend says," Tlakalel continued, "that the first birds were not born knowing how to fly. They had to learn the paths through the air, just as we learn the paths through the forest. But the sky is vast and trackless, so the wisest among them sang the roots into being, melodies that would guide their children and their children's children across the endless blue." The wind gusted stronger, and the feather songs grew more complex, weaving together in patterns that seemed to map the very air around them. Tochtli felt something stirring in his chest, a recognition that went deeper than thought. The glowing feather he had received from the masked man began to pulse in rhythm with the music, its light visible even through the cotton wrapping. "But why can we hear them now?" asked Xochitla, her young voice filled with wonder. Itzcua smiled, her ancient eyes reflecting the dancing light of the feathers. "Because we have learned to listen with more than our ears, child. The night traders hear what others cannot, because we have made ourselves vessels for the dreams of birds. We carry their memories in our cloaks, their hopes in our hearts." As the afternoon wore on, the merchants found themselves moving in rhythm with the feather songs. Their steps became a dance, their breathing synchronized with the rise and fall of the melodies. They were no longer simply walking through the mountain pass. They were participating in an ancient ritual, adding their own voices to a song that had been sung since the first bird took flight. Tochtli began to understand something profound about the nature of their trade. They were not merely merchants dealing in beautiful objects. They were keepers of memory, preservers of the songs that connected earth to sky, past to present, dream to waking. Each feather in their cloaks was a note in an endless symphony, a word in a story that had no beginning and no end. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the wind began to calm. The feather songs grew softer, more intimate, like lullabies sung to sleepy children. But they did not fade entirely. They settled into a gentle humming that would accompany the merchants for the rest of their journey through the pass. That night, as they made camp in a sheltered alcove carved from the living rock, Tochtli lay on his sleeping mat and listened to the whispered conversations of his feathers. In their soft voices, he heard stories of soaring above cloud forests, of diving through waterfalls of mist, of dancing with the wind in the thin air above the world. And in his dreams, he flew with them, not as a boy wearing a cloak of feathers, but as something new, something between human and bird. between earth and sky. He soared through the remembered paths that the feathers had sung into existence, following melodies that led not just through space, but through time itself, back to the first moment when a creature of earth dared to dream of touching the stars. When he woke, the mountain dawn was painting the peaks in shades of rose and gold, and the feathers of his cloak were still humming softly, as if they had been singing to him all through the night, weaving dreams of flight into the fabric of his sleeping mind. Chapter 5. Night Offerings at the Stone Gate. The stone gate rose from the mountain path like the fossilized skeleton of some primordial god. Two massive pillars of black volcanic rock stretched toward the star-scattered sky, connected by a lintel carved with symbols so ancient that even Itzcua could only guess at their meaning. The archway framed the path ahead, but to pass beneath it uninvited was said to bring misfortune that would follow a trader for 7 generations. Tochtli stood with the other merchants in the shadow of the great stones, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon him. Not human eyes, the gate was far from any village or settlement, but the watchful presence of spirits that dwelt in the spaces between stone and sky. The air itself seemed to thicken with expectation, heavy as the moment before lightning strikes. This is the threshold of Ehakatzin, Itzcua whispered, her voice carrying the reverence reserved for the most sacred places. Here, the feather god weighs the hearts of those who would walk the night paths. We must each offer our most precious feather, the one that holds the deepest peace of our soul. The merchants formed a circle before the gate, their feather cloaks rustling in the mountain wind like the wings of roosting birds. In the center of their gathering, Nikali began to build a fire using wood that had been carried from the sacred groves of Tenochtitlan. Each stick had been blessed by the priests of Quetzalcoatl, and as the flames caught and grew, they burned with colors that had no names, blues deeper than midnight, greens that held the essence of growing things, golds that seemed to capture the very soul of sunlight. From a leather pouch, Xitlali withdrew bundles of copal incense, the sacred resin that carried prayers to the realm of the gods. As she cast the amber chunks into the fire, smoke began to rise in spirals that seemed to dance with purpose, forming shapes that flickered at the edge of recognition. Birds in flight, hands raised in blessing, faces of ancestors long departed. The offering must come from the heart, Itzcua continued, her weathered hands already moving toward her own cloak. Not the most beautiful feather, not the rarest or most valuable, but the one that holds the truest piece of who you are. One by one, the merchants stepped forward to make their offerings. Nikali, the stern trader whose cloak bore the feathers of hunting birds, withdrew a simple brown feather from a common sparrow. As he placed it in the fire, he spoke in a voice thick with emotion. This came from the first bird I ever saved as a child, a sparrow with a broken wing that I nursed back to health. When it died of old age, it left this feather on my windowsill. It taught me that the smallest gifts often carry the greatest love. The feather caught fire and burned with a light that seemed far too bright for such a humble thing, sending sparks spiraling up toward the stars like tiny prayers. Xitlali followed, offering a brilliant blue feather from a cotinga that had once nested outside her childhood home. This bird sang me to sleep every night for 3 years, she said. Its song lives in this feather still, and I offer it so that others might find the peace it gave to me. As each merchant made their offering, Tochtli felt his anxiety growing. What could he give? His collection was small, gathered over only a few months of trading. He had no feathers with decades of history, no plumes that carried the weight of profound personal meaning. Then his fingers found the glowing feather given to him by the man in the blue beak mask. It pulsed gently against his palm, warm as a living thing. Surely this was his most precious possession, but was it truly his to give? It had been a gift, freely offered for a story freely told. Did that make it part of his soul, or was he merely its temporary guardian? As the last of the other merchants completed their offerings, all eyes turned to Tochtli. The fire crackled and danced, its sacred flames reaching toward the stone arch, like fingers seeking to touch the face of eternity. The young trader stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. But instead of the glowing feather, his hand moved to a different part of his cloak, to a small, unremarkable feather from a house wren. It was gray-brown and ordinary, the kind of feather that might be overlooked in a collection of more spectacular plumes. Yet as his fingers closed around it, memories flooded through him. "Just this feather," he said, his voice barely louder than the whisper of wind through stone, "came from a wren that built its nest in the eaves of my family's home. Every morning, it would sing the sun awake, and every evening, it would sing the day to sleep. When I was small and afraid of the dark, I would listen to its voice and know that I was not alone." He paused, feeling the weight of the moment, the attention of both his companions and the unseen watchers that dwelt within the gate. "The bird died the night before I left to join the feather merchants. I found this feather on my sleeping mat, as if it were a blessing for the journey ahead. It carries no magic that others can see, holds no rare beauty that merchants would prize. But it holds the memory of home, the sound of safety, the promise that even in the darkest night, there is always a song waiting to guide us toward the dawn." As he placed the humble feather in the sacred fire, something extraordinary happened. The flames leaped higher, burning with a pure white light that seemed to illuminate not just the circle of merchants, but the very stones of the gate itself. For a moment, the ancient symbols carved into the lintel glowed with the same radiance, and Tochtli could swear he heard the distant sound of wings, not the wings of any earthly bird, but the vast, slow wing beats of something immense and eternal. The light faded, but the feeling of presence remained. The gate no longer seemed like a barrier, but like a doorway opened in welcome. The spirits that dwelt within the stones had accepted their offerings, had weighed their hearts, and found them worthy. "It is done," Itzcua said, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "The path is open to us." As the merchants extinguished the sacred fire and prepared to pass beneath the stone gate, an old trader named Xochitla placed a gnarled hand on Tochtli's shoulder. "You chose well, young rabbit," he said, his eyes twinkling in the starlight. "The gods care nothing for the beauty of our offerings, only for the truth they contain. That wren's feather held more power than all the Quetzal plumes in the world, because it held a piece of your true self." As they walked beneath the ancient arch, Tochtli felt something shift within him. The gate was more than a physical passage. It was a transformation, a crossing from one state of being to another. He was no longer simply a boy learning to trade in feathers. He was becoming something deeper, something connected to the ancient currents that flowed between earth and sky, between the world of waking and the realm of dreams. Behind them, the stone gate stood silent against the star-filled sky, its vigil eternal, its purpose fulfilled once more. And in the ashes of the sacred fire, the spirits of offered feathers danced on the wind, carrying the prayers of the merchants toward whatever destiny awaited them on the path ahead. The night embraced them as they descended the far side of the mountain, and Tochtli walked with the knowledge that he had passed his first true test, not of skill or knowledge, but of the willingness to offer his authentic self to the mysteries that lay ahead. Chapter 6. The Feather Oracle's Dream. The village of Xochitla appeared in the pre-dawn mist, like a dream half-remembered upon waking. Adobe houses clustered around a central plaza, where a fountain carved from green jade sent water dancing toward the lightening sky. Smoke rose from cooking fires, carrying the scent of corn cakes and chocolate. But the merchants did not come seeking food or rest. They came for the oracle. Her dwelling stood apart from the village proper, built into the hollow of an ancient cecropia tree whose trunk was so vast that 20 men holding hands could not encircle it. Vines heavy with night-blooming flowers cascaded from its branches, and in the growing light, Tochtli could see that hundreds of feathers had been woven into the living curtain, offerings left by travelers seeking glimpses of what was to come. The oracle herself emerged as the merchants approached, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to walk between worlds. She was neither young nor old, but something timeless, her dark hair streaked with silver that caught the morning light like captured starbeams. Her huipil was woven from cotton so fine it seemed to be made of mist, and around her shoulders hung a cloak unlike any Tochtli had ever seen. Feathers from birds that existed only in legend, plumes that shifted color with each breath of wind. "I have been expecting you," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality of water flowing over stones. "The dreams have been restless these past nights, full of wings and whispers." Itzcua stepped forward and made the gesture of deep respect, her weathered hands forming the sign of the sacred spiral. "Honored Itzamna, we seek your wisdom before continuing our journey to the cloud forest. The path ahead grows dark, and we would know what shadows await us." The oracle, Itzamna, keeper of the feather dreams, smiled with the gentle sadness of one who sees too much. "Come then, children of the night paths. Let us ask the feathers what stories they wish to tell." She led them to a circular clearing beside the great tree, where the ground had been swept smooth and painted with symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed from the corner of the eye. At the center sat a shallow bowl carved from obsidian, its surface so perfectly polished that it reflected not just the sky above, but depths that seemed to go on forever. "Each of you must contribute a feather," Itzamna said, settling herself beside the bowl with the fluid motion of settling water. "Not an offering this time, but a question. Let each feather carry the weight of what you most need to know." The merchants formed a circle around the oracle, each selecting a feather from their cloaks with careful deliberation. Nakali chose a hawk feather, sharp and decisive. Tsitlali offered a hummingbird plume that shimmered with iridescent hope. Others selected feathers that spoke to their deepest concerns. Owl feathers for wisdom, eagle feathers for courage, dove feathers for peace. When it came to Tochtli's turn, his hand moved without conscious thought to the glowing feather given to him by the masked man. As his fingers closed around it, he felt its warmth pulse against his palm, and he knew that this was the question he needed answered. What was his true purpose on this journey? What was he meant to become? Itzamna filled the obsidian bowl with water drawn from a sacred cenote, water so clear it seemed like liquid crystal. One by one, she took the offered feathers and cast them onto the surface, where they floated like small boats carrying prayers across an infinite sea. "Now we dream together," she whispered, her hands moving in patterns above the bowl. "Close your eyes, children of the feather paths, and let the visions come." As Tochtli's eyelids fluttered shut, the world around him began to dissolve. The sounds of the waking village faded, replaced by the whisper of wind through infinite space. He felt himself falling, not down, but inward, into depths that existed not in the earth, but in the realm of possibility. The first vision came like a gentle wave washing over a peaceful shore. He saw the merchants continuing their journey, their canoes gliding through mist-shrouded waterways toward mountains that touched the sky. The trading went well, their feathers exchanged for rare plumes that would bring joy to the markets of Tenochtitlan. They returned home as heroes, their cloaks heavy with success. But even as this pleasant future unfolded before him, Tochtli sensed something else lurking at its edges, a shadow that grew larger with each passing moment. The second vision struck like lightning, sharp and sudden. Fog rolled across the water like a living thing, thick and gray and hungry. In its depths, a figure struggled and called out, one of their own, lost in the mist that swallowed sound and sight alike. Tochtli saw hands reaching through the gray veil, heard voices calling names that the fog devoured before they could find their target. A friend lost to fog. Itzamna's voice came from very far away, echoing the prophecy she had spoken before the visions began. The mist that rises from sorrow, the gray that comes when hearts forget their purpose. The third vision was the strangest of all. Tochtli saw himself standing at the edge of a vast lake, but he was no longer entirely human. Feathers grew from his arms like wings, and his eyes held the golden depth of a bird of prey. Around him, other figures stood transformed, some more bird than human, others more human than bird, all of them balanced on the knife's edge between two worlds. The choice that comes to all who walk the feather paths, Itzamna whispered. To remain bound to earth, or to learn the freedom of the sky. But beware, some who choose the sky forget the ground that gave them birth. As the visions faded, Tochtli felt himself rising back to the surface of ordinary consciousness, like a diver returning from the depths. Around him, the other merchants were stirring, their faces marked by the wonder and confusion that always followed true prophecy. Itzamna gathered the feathers from the water, each one now carrying a different quality of light, as if the visions had changed their very essence. She handed them back to their owners with the solemnity of a priest distributing sacred relics. The path ahead will test you all, she said, her voice heavy with the weight of what she had seen. But remember this, the greatest danger comes not from the fog that blinds the eyes, but from the mist that clouds the heart. Stay true to who you are, and the feathers will guide you home. As the merchants prepared to leave, Itzamna drew Tochtli aside. In her hands, she held a small pouch woven from spider silk and dyed the deep blue of twilight. "This is for you, young dreamer," she said, pressing the pouch into his hands. "It will hold the scent of any dream you choose to capture. But use it wisely. Some dreams are meant to be lived, not preserved." The pouch felt warm against his palm, and when he opened it slightly, he caught a whiff of something indescribable, the essence of possibility itself, the fragrance of futures yet to be born. As they walked away from the oracle's tree, the morning sun painting the world in shades of gold and green, Tochtli found himself thinking about the visions. The pleasant future, the dangerous fog, the transformation that awaited, which would come to pass. Perhaps, he thought, they all would. For the future was not a single path, but a vast web of possibilities, and every choice they made would determine which strand they followed toward their destiny. Behind them, Itzamna stood in the doorway of her treehouse, watching their departure with eyes that held the depth of eternity. And in the obsidian bowl, the sacred water continued to ripple with visions of what was to come, dreams that would unfold in their own time, in their own way, as all true prophecies must. Chapter 7. A path lit by fireflies. The forest that stretched before them seemed to breathe with its own inner light. As twilight deepened into true darkness, thousands of fireflies began their nightly dance, transforming the woodland into a cathedral of living stars. Each tiny beacon pulsed with its own rhythm, creating patterns that shifted and flowed like constellations come down to earth. The merchants had made camp at the forest's edge, but sleep eluded Tochtli. The oracle's visions haunted his thoughts, the friend lost to fog, the transformation that awaited, the choice between earth and sky. He lay on his sleeping mat, watching the fireflies through the canopy above, their gentle light painting moving shadows on his face. "Cannot sleep, young rabbit?" Itzel's voice came soft as moth wings from the darkness beside him. "The dreams feel too close," Tochtli whispered back. "Like they're pressing against the edges of now, trying to become real." The old woman chuckled, a sound like water over pebbles. Dreams have their own time, their own season. Fighting them only makes them stronger. Sometimes the best thing to do is to walk toward them, to meet them halfway. As if summoned by her words, a cluster of fireflies drifted closer to their camp, their lights pulsing in a pattern that seemed almost like a message. Tochtli sat up, drawn by something he couldn't name, a pull that came from deeper than curiosity, stronger than mere wonder. "They're calling," he said, though he couldn't explain how he knew this. Itzel nodded, her ancient eyes reflecting the dancing lights. The forest spirits sometimes choose a guide for those who need to walk the paths between sleeping and waking. Go, child. But remember, in the realm of the fireflies, not all lights lead home. Tochtli rose quietly, careful not to wake the other merchants. He wrapped his feather cloak around his shoulders and stepped into the forest, following the gentle procession of lights that seemed to beckon him deeper into the green darkness. The fireflies moved like a river of stars, flowing between the massive trunks of cecropia and mahogany trees. Their light revealed a path that seemed to exist only when illuminated, stones placed just so, fallen logs that formed perfect bridges over hidden streams, gaps in the undergrowth that opened at exactly the right moment. As he walked, Tochtli began to notice that the fireflies were not moving randomly. They pulsed in sequences, paused in formations, gathered in clusters that held meaning just beyond the edge of understanding. It was a language written in light, a conversation conducted in the grammar of luminescence. The path led him deeper than he had intended to go, winding through groves where the trees grew so close their branches formed a living roof overhead. Here, the firefly's light took on an otherworldly quality, reflecting off leaves and bark until the entire forest seemed to glow from within. It was in one of these groves that Tochtli discovered the wonder that would haunt his dreams for years to come. The trees here were different, ancient beyond measure, their trunks twisted into spirals that seemed to reach toward some celestial music only they could hear. And from every branch, every twig, every fork where leaf met stem, hung feathers. Thousands upon thousands of feathers, suspended on threads so fine they were invisible in the firefly light. They moved with each breath of wind, creating a symphony of whispered motion that seemed to harmonize with the pulse of the tiny lights. Quetzal feathers caught the green glow and transformed it into emerald fire. Macaw plumes blazed with reflected reds and golds. Hummingbird feathers sparkled like captured rainbows, each one a prism breaking light into its component dreams. But these were not ordinary feathers, Tochtli realized as he moved deeper into the grove. They glowed with their own inner radiance, pulsing in rhythm with the fireflies, as if they were part of the same vast organism. Some were feathers he recognized, the brilliant blue of the cotinga, the fierce red of the cardinal, the subtle browns and grays of forest birds. Others belonged to no species he had ever seen, their colors shifting and changing like the surface of deep water. At the center of the grove stood the largest tree of all, its trunk so vast it seemed less like a plant than a living mountain. Its branches stretched impossibly high, disappearing into darkness that even the fireflies could not penetrate. And from its lowest branch, within reach of a tall man's outstretched hand, hung a single feather that made Tochtli's breath catch in his throat. It was white, not the simple white of swan or egret, but a white that contained all colors, a luminescence that seemed to hold the very essence of light itself. As he watched, it pulsed with the same rhythm as his own heartbeat, as if it were somehow connected to the life force that flowed through his veins. Without conscious thought, Tochtli reached toward the feather. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, the world exploded into vision. He saw the grove as it had been in ages past, a gathering place for birds from across the world, a parliament of wings where the great migrations were planned and the songs of the sky were composed. He saw the first feather merchants, not human but something between human and bird, their forms shifting like smoke as they moved between the worlds of earth and air. He saw the future too, himself standing in this same grove, but changed, transformed into something that was neither fully human nor fully bird, but something new, something that bridged the gap between ground and sky. Around him, other figures stood in similar transformation, their feather cloaks no longer worn but grown, their eyes holding the golden depth of creatures who had learned to see with more than mortal sight. The vision faded, leaving him gasping in the firefly-lit grove. The white feather still hung before him, pulsing with patient light, but he did not reach for it again. Some gifts, he understood now, could only be received when the receiver was ready to become what the gift required. Instead, he settled himself at the base of the great tree, wrapping his cloak around him like a cocoon. The fireflies gathered closer, their lights creating a gentle dome of illumination around his resting place. Above him, the hanging feathers whispered their ancient songs, lullabies that spoke of journeys across impossible distances, of love that transcended the boundaries between species, of dreams that took wing and soared beyond the reach of earthbound hearts. Sleep came to him like a gentle tide, and with it, dreams more vivid than any he had ever known. He flew with the ancient pilgrims, his form shifting between boy and bird as he soared over landscapes that existed only in the realm of possibility. He danced with the fireflies in their eternal celebration of light, learned their language of pulse and pause, of gathering and dispersal. And in the deepest part of his dream, he heard a voice that might have been the wind, or the whisper of feathers, or the collective sigh of all the birds that had ever taken flight. Not yet, young dreamer. Not yet. But the time comes when all who walk the feather paths must choose to remain bound to earth or to learn the freedom of the sky. When that moment arrives, remember this grove. Remember the light that lives in darkness, the songs that sleep in silence, the wings that wait in every heart brave enough to dream of flight. When dawn came, filtering through the canopy in shafts of gold and green, Tochtli woke to find himself back at the merchant's camp, his sleeping mat beneath him, his companions stirring around the cold ashes of their fire. Had it been a dream? But in his hand, he clutched a single firefly, its light dim but steady in the growing daylight. Proof that some journeys take place in realms where the rules of waking and sleeping no longer apply. Itzcua looked at him with knowing eyes as he sat up, the firefly cupped gently in his palms. "Did you find what you were looking for, young rabbit?" Tochtli smiled, releasing the tiny creature to join its kin in their daylight hiding places. "I found what I needed to find," he said, "even if I don't yet understand what it means." As the merchants prepared to continue their journey, Tochtli cast one last look back at the forest. Somewhere in its green depths, a grove of hanging feathers waited in patient silence, and a white feather pulsed with the rhythm of possibilities yet to be born. Chapter 8. The Sleepy River of Xochitla. The river Xochitla moved like liquid dreams, its waters so still and dark they seemed to hold the accumulated sleep of centuries. No current disturbed its surface, no fish jumped to break the mirror-smooth expanse that reflected the sky with perfect clarity. Even the sound of their paddles seemed muffled, as if the river itself absorbed all noise and transformed it into something softer, gentler, more conducive to rest. "Ay, they say the gods themselves come here to sleep," Xitlali whispered as their canoes glided onto the mysterious waters. Her voice carried no further than the next boat, swallowed by the river's strange acoustics. "That Tlaloc, the rain god, sends his most troubled storms here to find peace." Tochtli felt the truth of her words settling into his bones like warmth from a fire. The moment their canoe touched the Xochitla's surface, a profound drowsiness began to creep through his limbs. Not the heavy exhaustion that comes from hard travel, but something deeper, a lassitude that seemed to rise from the water itself, seeping through the wooden hull and into his very soul. Around him, the other merchants were experiencing the same phenomenon. Nakali's usually alert posture had softened, his shoulders relaxing as his paddle moved in slow, hypnotic strokes. Even Itzcua, who rarely showed fatigue despite her advanced years, had taken on the dreamy expression of someone caught between waking and sleeping. "Do not fight it," the old woman murmured, her words floating across the water like flower petals on a gentle breeze. "The Xochitla gives what we need most, the deep rest that heals not just the body, but the spirit. Let it carry you where it will." As they drifted deeper into the river's embrace, the landscape around them began to take on an otherworldly quality. The trees that lined the banks seemed taller, their branches reaching toward the sky with an impossible grace. Flowers bloomed in colors that had no names, their petals glowing with soft phosphorescence in the gathering dusk. Even the air itself seemed different, thicker, more substantial, as if it were woven from the stuff of dreams. The first merchant to succumb completely was Xochitla, the elderly trader whose weathered face had seen more journeys than anyone could count. His eyes fluttered closed as his canoe drifted alongside Tochtli's, and immediately he began to speak in the voice of someone deep in dream. "I see the market of my childhood," he said, his words carrying the wonder of rediscovery. "My mother is there, young again, selling flowers that sing when the wind touches them. She's calling my name, but I can't remember. I can't remember what she used to call me before I became a merchant of feathers." His voice trailed off into contented murmuring, but the dream seemed to continue behind his closed eyelids, painting expressions of joy and sorrow and recognition across his sleeping features. One by one, The other merchants began to drift into the river's enchanted slumber. Xochitla spoke of flying with hummingbirds through gardens made of crystallized music. Nikali dreamed aloud of his first successful trade, when he was barely older than Tochtli, and how the pride in his father's eyes had felt like sunlight on his face. Even Itzcua, who had seemed immune to the river's influence, eventually surrendered to its gentle pull. But her dreams were different, older, deeper, filled with visions of the first feather merchants and the ancient pacts they had made with the spirits of air and wing. I see the beginning, she whispered, her voice carrying the authority of prophecy. When the boundary between human and bird was thin as morning mist, and love could transform flesh into feather, heart into wing. The first traders were not born to their calling. They chose it, and in choosing, they became something new. Tochtli fought the drowsiness longer than the others, partly from youth's natural resistance to rest, partly from a growing sense that something important was about to happen. But eventually, even his determination proved no match for the Xochitla's ancient magic. His eyelids grew heavy, his paddle slipped from nerveless fingers, and he sank into a sleep deeper than any he had ever known. His dream began in the grove of hanging feathers, but this time he was not alone. Other figures moved through the firefly-lit space, some human, some bird, some shifting between the two forms like smoke given shape by wind. They welcomed him with gestures that needed no translation, drawing him into their eternal dance of transformation. But as the dream deepened, it changed. He found himself soaring high above the world, his body transformed into something between boy and bird. Below him spread a landscape of impossible beauty, mountains that sang, rivers that flowed upward toward the stars, forests where every tree bore fruit made of crystallized dreams. And there, flying beside him with wings that spanned the sky, was the great bird from his very first dream. But now he could see its face, and with a shock of recognition, he realized it was himself, not as he was, but as he might become. The bird Tochtli's eyes held all the wisdom of the wind, all the freedom of the endless sky, but also a sadness that cut through the dream like a blade. To fly is to leave the ground forever, the bird self said, its voice carrying the sound of wind through feathers. To touch the stars is to lose the warmth of earth. Every choice carries its price, young dreamer. Every transformation demands its sacrifice. The dream began to fragment then, breaking apart like reflections on disturbed water. Tochtli found himself falling, not toward the earth, but toward waking, toward the gentle rocking of his canoe on the sleepy river. He opened his eyes to find the sun setting behind the trees, painting the Xochitla's surface in shades of gold and crimson. Around him, the other merchants were beginning to stir, their faces bearing the soft expressions of those who have touched something profound in sleep. "What did you dream?" Xochitla asked, her voice still thick with the residue of visions. "I dreamed of flying," Tochtli said simply, "and of the price that flight demands." As they shared their dreams in the gathering twilight, Tochtli began to understand something important about their journey. Each vision, each encounter, each magical moment was not just an experience to be treasured. It was a lesson, a piece of the larger puzzle that would eventually reveal his true purpose among the feather merchants. The Xochitla had shown them all something different, but the message was the same. Transformation was coming, choices would have to be made, and the path ahead would demand more than they had yet been asked to give. As night fell completely, and they made camp on a small island in the river's heart, Tochtli lay on his sleeping mat, and listened to the gentle lapping of water against the shore. The river's magic still flowed through him, carrying with it the echo of dreams and the promise of more visions to come. In his hand, he clutched the dream-catcher pouch given to him by the oracle, and for the first time, he opened it fully and breathed in the scent of his flying dream. The fragrance was indescribable. Wind and freedom and the vast loneliness of the sky, all woven together into something that made his heart ache with longing and fear in equal measure. Tomorrow they would leave the Xochitla behind, but its gift would travel with them. The deep rest that heals, the dreams that teach, and the growing understanding that some journeys change not just where we go, but who we become along the way. Chapter 9. The Night Market Beneath the Cactus Moon. The moon hung in the desert sky like a great flowering cactus, its surface marked with shadows that resembled the spines and blooms of the giant saguaros that dotted the landscape below. Tochtli had never seen such a moon, perfectly round yet somehow organic, as if the night sky itself had grown this celestial plant to light the way for travelers in the wasteland. The village of Mistlan appeared as they crested a low hill, its adobe buildings clustered around a central plaza where torches burned with flames of unusual colors, some blue as deep water, others green as new leaves, still others the warm gold of honey. The air shimmered with heat even in the darkness, and the scent of night-blooming cereus flowers drifted on the warm breeze. The cactus moon comes only once each season. Itzcua explained as they approached the village gates. When it rises, the desert people hold their night market, a gathering where dreams are traded alongside goods, where the boundaries between waking and sleeping grow thin as spider silk. The market sprawled across the plaza and into the narrow streets beyond, but it was unlike any market Tochtli had ever seen. The vendors sat behind blankets spread with wares that seemed to shift and change in the flickering torchlight. One woman sold bottles filled with what looked like captured starlight, each one pulsing with its own inner radiance. A man with skin like weathered leather offered bowls of sand that sang when the wind touched it, each grain producing a different note in an endless, ever-changing melody. But it was the feather merchants who drew Tochtli's attention most strongly. They sat in a circle at the market's heart, their wares displayed on blankets of midnight blue. These were not the familiar feathers of forest birds, but plumes from creatures of the desert. Roadrunners whose feathers held the speed of wind across sand. Owls whose plumes carried the wisdom of ancient stones. Hummingbirds that fed on cactus flowers and whose feathers glowed with the stored sunlight of the desert day. "Welcome, children of the night paths," called one of the desert merchants, a woman whose hair was white as salt and whose eyes held the depth of hidden springs. "We have been expecting you. The cactus moon told us of your coming in last night's dreams." As the forest merchants settled into the circle, Tochtli found himself drawn to a young vendor who sat slightly apart from the others. She was perhaps his own age, with skin bronzed by desert sun and hair adorned with small feathers that caught the torchlight like captured flames. Before her lay a collection of pouches, each one sewn from different materials, some from cotton soft as cloud, others from leather supple as water, still others from materials he couldn't identify. "What do you sell?" he asked, settling cross-legged before her blanket. She smiled, and her teeth were white as bleached bone in the torchlight. "Dreams," she said simply. "Or rather, the means to capture them. Each pouch is woven with different magic. Some hold the scent of dreams, others their colors, still others their sounds. But this one..." She lifted a pouch that seemed to be made from woven moonbeams. This one traps the essence of dreams themselves. Tochtli's hand moved instinctively to the dreamcatcher pouch the oracle had given him, still warm against his chest. "How much?" he asked. "Not gold," the girl said, her dark eyes studying his face with unsettling intensity. "Not jade or precious stones. Dreams are traded for dreams. Young merchant, tell me something you have dreamed, and I will tell you if it is worth the price." Around them, the market hummed with quiet activity. The desert merchants traded their wares with Itzcua and the others. Feathers for feathers, stories for songs, memories for hopes. But Tochtli found himself caught in the girl's gaze, feeling as if she could see directly into his soul. "I dreamed of flying," he said finally. "Of becoming something between human and bird, of soaring so high I could touch the stars. But in the dream, I also felt the loneliness of the sky, the price of leaving the earth behind." The girl nodded slowly, her expression growing serious. "A true dream," she said. "One that carries both gift and warning. Yes, this is worth the price." She handed him the moonbeam pouch, and as their fingers touched, he felt a shock of recognition, not of her face, but of something deeper, as if their dreams had touched in the realm beyond waking. "But I must give you a warning as well," she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Never sleep on owl ground, the places where the great desert owls make their roosts. They are guardians of the boundary between dream and nightmare, and they do not welcome strangers in their domain." Before Tochtli could ask what she meant, a commotion arose from the far side of the market. A merchant was calling out in distress, his voice carrying clearly across the plaza. "Itzcua! Has anyone seen Itzcua? He was here just moments ago, examining the singing sands, and now..." Tochtli's blood turned to ice water in his veins. Itzcua, one of their own company, a quiet man who specialized in the feathers of waterbirds. He had been with them at the sleepy river, had shared his dreams of fishing with herons in the shallows of hidden lakes. How could he simply vanish in the middle of a crowded market? The forest merchants rose as one, their faces grave with concern. They spread out through the market, calling Itzcua's name, searching behind every stall and in every shadowed corner. But it was as if the man had simply dissolved into the desert air, leaving no trace of his passing. "The owl ground," the girl whispered to Tochtli as he prepared to join the search. "Ask them if he went toward the owl ground. Sometimes the lost are drawn there, pulled by dreams they cannot resist." As the search continued through the night, growing more desperate with each passing hour, Tochtli clutched the moonbeam pouch and thought about the oracle's prophecy. A friend lost to fog. But there was no fog here in the desert, only the clear, star-filled sky and the strange cactus moon that watched their frantic efforts with silent, spiny indifference. It wasn't until dawn began to paint the eastern sky with pale rose and gold that they found the first clue. Itzcua's feather cloak, abandoned beside a cluster of barrel cacti at the village's edge. The cloak was intact, undamaged, but empty of its owner, as if he had simply stepped out of it and walked away into the desert dawn. And in the distance, barely visible against the lightning sky, stood a formation of red rock pillars where the great desert owls made their roosts. The owl ground the girl had warned him about. where dreams and nightmares danced together in the thin air between sleeping and waking. The cactus moon faded as the sun rose, but its strange light seemed to linger in the moonbeam pouch at Tochtli's side, pulsing gently like a captured heartbeat, holding within its woven depths the essence of dreams, both beautiful and terrible. Chapter 10. The Disappearance of Itzcua. The storm came without warning, rolling across the desert like a living thing made of wind and fury. One moment the merchants stood in the pale light of dawn, staring at Itzcua's abandoned cloak. The next, they were engulfed in a maelstrom of sand and lightning that turned day into night and silence into chaos. Stay together. Itzl's voice barely carried above the howling wind. Link arms. Do not let the storm separate us. But even as she spoke, Tochtli felt the desert's power pulling at him, trying to tear him away from his companions. Sand stung his eyes and filled his mouth with the taste of ancient stone. The wind caught his feather cloak and threatened to lift him from the ground entirely, as if the storm itself were trying to claim him as it had claimed Itzcua. Through the swirling chaos, he caught glimpses of the red rock pillars where the great owls roosted, the owl ground that the dream seller had warned him about. The stone formations seemed to pulse with their own inner light, and for a moment, he could swear he saw a figure moving among them, calling out in a voice that might have been Itzcua's. "There!" he shouted, pointing toward the rocks. "I see him." But his words were swallowed by the storm, and when he looked again, the figure was gone, leaving only the dancing shadows cast by lightning and wind-blown sand. The tempest lasted until midday, then vanished as suddenly as it had come, leaving the merchants huddled together in a landscape transformed. The familiar contours of the desert had been reshaped by the wind. Dunes shifted and valleys filled, as if the storm had rewritten the very geography of the place. And Itzcua was nowhere to be found. "And we must search the owl ground," Nikali said, his usually stern face marked by worry. "If he went there during the storm..." "No," Itzl said firmly. "The owl ground is forbidden to the living during daylight hours. The great owls guard the boundary between dream and waking, and they do not suffer intrusion lightly. We must wait for nightfall, when the proper rituals can be performed." As the day wore on, the merchants made camp in the shadow of a great saguaro cactus, its arms raised toward the sky like a supplicant seeking mercy from the gods. They spoke little, each lost in their own thoughts about their missing companion. Itzcua had been quiet, gentle, a man who found joy in the simple beauty of waterbird feathers and the stories they told of hidden lakes and secret streams. When darkness finally fell, Itzl gathered the merchants in a circle and began to prepare for the ritual that would allow them to enter the owl ground safely. From her pack, she withdrew a flute carved from the hollow bone of a crane, its surface inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the firelight. "This is the song of calling," she explained, her weathered fingers caressing the instrument with reverence. It was taught to the first feather merchants by the owls themselves, a melody that opens the paths between the worlds of sleeping and waking. But remember, once we enter their domain, we are subject to their laws. Speak only truth, think only pure thoughts, and do not touch anything that glows with its own light. The flute's voice rose into the desert night, haunting and beautiful, carrying notes that seemed to come from the very heart of loneliness. As the melody wove through the air, the red rock pillars began to respond, their surfaces glowing with a soft phosphorescence that revealed hidden passages and chambers carved into the living stone. One by one, the merchants rose and began to walk toward the owl ground, their movements synchronized with the rhythm of Itzl's song. Tochtli felt the music pulling at something deep within his chest, awakening a longing he couldn't name, a desire to fly, to soar, to leave behind the weight of earthbound existence. The entrance to the owl ground was a narrow cleft between two towering pillars, barely wide enough for a single person to pass through. As they approached, Tochtli could see that the walls were covered with paintings, ancient images of owls with human faces, humans with owl wings, and creatures that were neither fully one nor the other. Inside, the passages opened into a vast chamber carved from the heart of the rock formation. The ceiling soared high above them, lost in shadows that seemed to move with their own purpose. And everywhere, perched on ledges and outcroppings, were the great desert owls, magnificent birds with wingspans wider than a man's outstretched arms, their golden eyes reflecting the strange phosphorescent light that emanated from the walls. At the chamber's center stood a pool of water so still it might have been polished obsidian. And beside the pool, sitting cross-legged as if in meditation, was Itzcua. "My friend," Nikali called softly, stepping toward the motionless figure. "We have come to bring you home." But as he drew closer, it became clear that something was wrong. Itzcua's eyes were open, but they stared at nothing, reflecting the same golden light as the owls around them. His breathing was so shallow it was barely perceptible, and when Nikali touched his shoulder, he did not respond. "He walks in the dream realm," Itzl whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. "The owls have taken his spirit to guard the boundaries between sleeping and waking. His body remains, but his soul soars in the spaces between stars." One of the great owls, larger than the rest and crowned with feathers that seemed to be made of captured moonlight, spread its wings and glided down to perch beside the pool. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through hollow reeds, ancient and wise and infinitely sad. "The water dreamer came to us in the storm," it said, its golden eyes fixed on its cell. "He was lost in visions of lakes that exist only in the realm of possibility, streams that flow backward through time. We offered him sanctuary in our domain, but the price of such refuge is the surrender of earthbound form." "Can he be returned to us?" Chitlali asked, tears streaming down her young face. The owl tilted its great head, considering. "Perhaps, but only if another takes his place, only if someone else chooses to walk the boundary paths in his stead. The balance must be maintained, one soul for another, one dreamer for another." The chamber fell silent, except for the soft whisper of owl wings and the barely audible sound of Itzcua's breathing. Tochtli felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a physical thing, and he knew that this was one of the choices the oracle had foreseen, a moment when the path would demand more than he had ever been asked to give. But before he could speak, before he could offer himself in Itzcua's place, the great owl spoke again. "The choice need not be made tonight. We will keep the water dreamer safe in our care while you continue your journey. But know this, the debt remains, and it will be paid before your path reaches its end. The boundary between dream and waking must have its guardians, and the feather merchants have always provided them." As they prepared to leave the owl ground, Tochtli cast one last look at Itzcua's still form beside the obsidian pool. His friend's face was peaceful, almost serene, as if he had found something in the dream realm that he had been searching for all his life. But the sight filled Tochtli with a mixture of sorrow and fear. Sorrow for the loss of a gentle companion, and fear that he might be the one called upon to take Itzcua's place when the time came for the debt to be paid. The flute's haunting melody guided them back through the passages and out into the desert night, where the stars seemed dimmer than before, as if some of their light had been absorbed by the owl ground's ancient stones. And in the distance, barely audible on the wind, came the sound of wings, vast, slow wing beats that might have belonged to the great bird of Tochtli's dreams, watching over them as they carried their burden of sorrow deeper into the mysteries that awaited on the path ahead. Chapter 11. Echoes from the Featherstone. The Featherstone rose from the earth like the fossilized heart of some ancient giant, its surface black as obsidian, but shot through with veins of silver that caught the morning light and threw it back in patterns that hurt to look at directly. It stood alone in a circular clearing where no grass grew, where even the hardiest desert plants seemed to shrink back from its presence. Carved into its surface were names, thousands upon thousands of them, etched in scripts both familiar and strange. Some were written in the flowing glyphs of Tochtli's people, others in symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed from the corner of the eye. The newest names were carved near the base, their edges still sharp and clean. The oldest, near the stone's peak, had been worn smooth by wind and time until they were barely visible impressions in the dark surface. The Memorial of the Lost. Itzcua said softly as the merchants approached the monolith. Every feather merchant who has vanished on the night paths, every trader who chose transformation over return, every soul who found the boundary between dream and waking and decided to cross it forever. Tochtli's eyes searched the carved surface, looking for names he might recognize. Near the bottom, he found several that made his heart clench with recognition. Merchants who had left Tenochtitlan in years past and never returned, their fates unknown until now. And there, carved in fresh letters that still held traces of stone dust, was a name that made him gasp aloud. Itzcua, Walker of Water Dreams. But he's not dead, Xochitla protested, her voice breaking with emotion. He's in the owl ground, guarded by the great owls. We saw him breathing, saw his chest rise and fall. Death is not the only way to be lost, Xochitla said grimly. Sometimes the living choose to step outside the world of flesh and bone, to become something else entirely. The stone remembers all who have made that choice, whether by accident or design. As they stood before the monument, other merchants began to arrive, solitary figures emerging from the desert like mirages given form. They came from all directions, drawn by some invisible summons to this place of remembrance. Some Tochtli recognized as traders from distant cities, their feather cloaks marking them as members of the same ancient brotherhood. Others were strangers, their faces painted with symbols he had never seen, their garments adorned with feathers from birds that existed only in legend. Without speaking, the gathered merchants formed a circle around the Featherstone. From somewhere in their ranks came the soft sound of a drum, its rhythm slow and steady as a sleeping heart. One by one, they began to place their hands on the stone's surface, their fingers tracing the carved names with reverent care. When Tochtli's turn came, he approached the monolith with trembling steps. The stone's surface was warm beneath his palm, pulsing with a life that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. As his fingers found Itzcua's newly carved name, the world around him suddenly shifted. Voices began to whisper in his mind, not words, but something deeper, more primal. They spoke of journeys that had no end, of transformations that could not be undone, of choices made in moments of desperate beauty when the call of the sky became too strong to resist. He heard Itzcua's voice among them, gentle and sad. I saw the lake of all waters, young friend, the place where every stream begins and ends, where the rain is born and the rivers go to die. I could not turn away from such beauty, could not return to the small ponds and muddy streams of the waking world. Other voices joined the chorus, merchants from generations past, their words overlapping and interweaving like the songs of a vast, invisible choir. I became the wind that carries seeds across the desert. Sevens. I chose the form of the hummingbird to dance forever among flowers that bloom only in dreams. Sevens. I found the path to the realm where all feathers are one feather, where all birds are one bird, where all songs are one eternal song. The voices grew stronger, more insistent, and Tochtli felt them pulling at something deep within his chest. They were offering him a choice, to join them in their eternal flight, to step outside the boundaries of mortal existence and become something vast and free and terrible. For a moment, the temptation was overwhelming. He could feel his spirit beginning to lift, beginning to separate from the weight of flesh and bone. The voices promised him wonders beyond imagination, the ability to soar with the great bird of his dreams, to touch the stars, to become one with the endless sky. But then another voice cut through the chorus, strong and familiar and achingly human. Not yet, young rabbit, not yet. It was Itzel's voice, speaking not from the stone but from the world of the living, anchoring him to the circle of merchants who still drew breath, who still walked the paths between villages rather than the paths between stars. With tremendous effort, Tochtli pulled his hand away from the stone. The voices faded, but slowly, reluctantly, as if they were disappointed to lose a potential new member of their eternal choir. "What did you hear?" Itzel asked, her ancient eyes studying his face with concern. "They wanted me to join them," Tochtli said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They showed me what I could become, free of earth, free of flesh, free to fly forever in the realm of pure dream." "And what did you choose?" Tochtli looked around the circle of living merchants, their faces marked by the same mixture of longing and loss that he felt in his own heart. "I chose to remain," he said, "for now. But I understand now why they left, why they chose transformation over return. The call of the sky is... it's almost impossible to resist." As the ceremony continued, each merchant sharing their own encounter with the voices of the lost, Tochtli began to understand something profound about the nature of their calling. They were not simply traders in beautiful objects. They were guardians of a threshold, keepers of the boundary between the world of flesh and the realm of spirit. Some, like Itzcua, would eventually cross that boundary and become something else entirely. Others would resist the call and return to their earthbound lives, carrying with them the memory of what they had chosen not to become. And a few, the strongest or perhaps the most stubborn, would walk the edge between worlds for their entire lives, never fully human but never fully transformed. As the sun reached its zenith and the ceremony drew to a close, the gathered merchants began to disperse, melting back into the desert like shadows fleeing the light. But before they left, each one approached the stone one final time, adding their own small offering to the memorial, a feather, a bead, a whispered prayer for those who had chosen the sky over the earth. Tochtli's offering was the smallest of all, a single tear that fell from his cheek and struck the stone beside Itzcua's name. But as it touched the dark surface, it seemed to sink into the rock itself, becoming part of the eternal record of love and loss that the Featherstone preserved. As they prepared to leave the memorial behind, Tochtli felt something shift within him, a new understanding of the weight he carried, the responsibility that came with walking the feather paths. He was no longer simply a young merchant learning his trade. He was a keeper of memory, a guardian of the boundary between worlds, a living link in the chain that connected earth to sky, flesh to spirit, dream to waking. And somewhere in the depths of his heart, he knew that his own name would one day be carved into the stone's surface, whether as one who chose transformation or one who chose to remain. Only time would tell. Chapter 12. A Cloak for the Sleeping Deer. The deer lay beneath a canopy of flowering vines, its breathing shallow and labored, one hind leg bent at an unnatural angle. Blood matted the soft brown fur of its flank, and its dark eyes held the glassy sheen of approaching death. It was a young doe, perhaps in her second year, with the delicate build of the desert deer that lived among the cacti and thorny shrubs. Tochtli found her as the merchants made their evening camp beside a hidden spring, drawn by a sound that was barely more than a whisper, the soft exhalation of pain that all wounded creatures make when they think no one is listening. She had sought shelter in a grove of palo verde trees, their green bark glowing softly in the fading light, their branches heavy with golden flowers that perfumed the air with the scent of honey and hope. "She's been caught by a jaguar," Xochitla said softly, kneeling beside the injured animal. "See the claw marks?" But something frightened the cat away before it could finish the hunt. The doe's eyes tracked their movements with the wariness of prey, but she was too weak to flee. Her sides rose and fell with the rapid, shallow breathing of shock, and Tochtli could see that her time was measured in hours, perhaps less. "We should put her out of her misery," Nikali said, his voice gentle but practical. "It would be a kindness." But Tochtli found himself shaking his head, his hand moving instinctively to his feather cloak. "No," he said, though he couldn't explain the certainty that filled his voice. "There's something else we can do." Without fully understanding why, he began to unfasten his cloak, the magnificent garment that had been gifted to him in the silent market, woven with feathers from birds both common and rare. The other merchants watched in stunned silence as he spread the cloak over the dying deer, covering her broken body with the accumulated dreams and memories of 100 different wings. "Tochtli," Itzcua said softly, "what are you doing?" "I don't know," he admitted, his hands smoothing the feathers over the deer's trembling form. "But in my dreams, I've seen this moment. The deer who sleeps beneath feathers, who dreams of running on legs that never tire, who finds healing in the space between one heartbeat and the next." As the cloak settled over the doe, something extraordinary began to happen. The feathers seemed to come alive, rustling and shifting as if stirred by an invisible wind. Colors flowed across the surface like water, the deep green of quetzal plumes, the brilliant red of macaw feathers, the iridescent shimmer of hummingbird down. And with the colors came warmth, a gentle heat that seemed to seep into the deer's wounded body. The doe's breathing began to slow, deepening from the rapid panting of pain to the steady rhythm of peaceful sleep. Her eyes closed, and for a moment Tochtli feared she had died. But then he saw the subtle rise and fall of her chest beneath the feather cloak, and he knew she had simply surrendered to dreams deeper than any mortal sleep. "The legend of the dreaming deer," Tlacaelel whispered, his weathered face filled with wonder. "I thought it was just a story my grandmother told." "Tell us," Itzcua said, settling herself beside the sleeping animal. "Tell us the story." The old merchant's eyes grew distant, as if he were looking back across the years to his childhood. "She said that long ago, when the world was younger and the boundaries between species were not so fixed, there lived a deer who fell in love with the sky. Every night, she would stand on the highest hill and watch the birds fly overhead, longing to join them in their aerial dance. Around them, the other merchants gathered in a circle, drawn by the ancient power of story and the mystery unfolding before their eyes. The deer slept on beneath the feather cloak, her breathing growing stronger with each passing moment. The deer prayed to Ehakatzin, the feather god, begging for the gift of flight. But the god knew that to grant her wish would mean her death. No earthbound creature could survive the transformation to aerial form. So instead, he gave her a different gift: the ability to dream of flying, to soar through the realm of sleep while her body remained safely on the ground. As if responding to the story, the feather cloak began to glow with a soft phosphorescence, each plume catching and holding the last light of day. Beneath its surface, the deer's form seemed to shimmer and shift, as if she were indeed flying through landscapes that existed only in dreams. But the gift came with a price. Tlacaelel continued. The deer would sleep for 7 days and 7 nights, dreaming of flight while her body healed from whatever wounds had brought her to the edge of death. And when she woke, she would carry within her the memory of the sky, the knowledge of what it meant to soar above the earth. "And the feathers?" Citlali asked, her young voice filled with wonder. The feathers would be transformed as well, carrying within them the deer's dreams of flight. They would become bridges between earth and sky, between the world of flesh and the realm of spirit. And any who wore them would find their own dreams touched by the deer's longing for the heavens. As the night deepened, the merchants took turns keeping watch over the sleeping deer. They spoke in whispers of their own dreams, their own longings for transformation and transcendence. Some told of visions where they had flown with birds, others of moments when they had felt the pull of the sky so strongly they had nearly stepped out of their human forms entirely. Tochtli found himself thinking of Itzcua, sleeping his eternal sleep in the owl ground, and of all the names carved into the featherstone, merchants who had chosen the sky over the earth, transformation over return. Was this what they had felt? This overwhelming desire to become something more than human, something free of the weight and limitation of flesh? As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, the deer began to stir beneath the feather cloak. Her eyes opened, not the glassy, pain-filled orbs of the night before, but clear, bright pools that seemed to hold depths of sky. She rose to her feet with fluid grace, her injured leg now whole and strong, and for a moment she stood perfectly still, as if listening to music only she could hear. Then, with a movement like liquid starlight, she bounded away into the desert dawn, her hooves barely touching the ground as she ran. But before she disappeared entirely, she turned back once, her gaze meeting Tochtli's across the distance, and in her eyes he saw gratitude and something else. Recognition, as if she knew him from dreams they had shared. When Tochtli lifted his feather cloak from where the deer had lain, he found it transformed. The feathers still held their original colors, But now they seemed to pulse with an inner light, and when the wind touched them, they sang with voices that spoke of running and leaping and the joy of movement unbound by earthly limitations. "The deer's dreams are in your cloak now," Itzcua said, her ancient eyes bright with unshed tears. "You have given her the gift of healing, and she has given you the gift of her sky dreams. Wear it well, young rabbit. Such gifts are not given lightly." As they prepared to continue their journey, Tochtli wrapped the transformed cloak around his shoulders and felt the deer's dreams settling into his bones like warmth from a fire. He understood now that his path was leading him toward choices he could barely imagine, transformations that would test the very core of who he was. But for now, he was content to walk the earth with the memory of the deer's gratitude warming his heart, and the echo of her sky dreams singing softly in the feathers that danced around his shoulders with each step he took toward whatever destiny awaited him on the path ahead. Chapter 13. Feathered Steps on Ash Road. The path ahead stretched like a gray scar across the landscape, its surface covered in volcanic ash, so fine it rose in small clouds with each footstep. This was the Ash Road, the ancient route that led through the Valley of Fallen Warriors, where legend said an entire army had perished in a single night, their dreams of glory transformed into eternal sleep. The merchants walked in single file, their feet making no sound on the powdery surface. Even their breathing seemed muted here, as if the ash absorbed not just sound, but the very essence of life itself. On either side of the road, the remnants of an ancient battlefield stretched toward the horizon, broken spear points jutting from the gray earth like the bones of some vast, buried creature. "Step softly," Itzcua whispered, her voice barely disturbing the oppressive silence. "The warriors sleep beneath our feet, and their dreams are restless. Too heavy a tread might wake them, and the dead do not always welcome the living in their domain." Tochtli felt the weight of her words settling into his bones like the ash that clung to his sandals. With each step, he imagined the warriors below, young men who had marched to war with songs on their lips and feathers in their hair, only to find death waiting in this desolate valley. Their bones had long since turned to dust, but their spirits remained, trapped in the gray twilight between life and death. As they walked, something strange began to happen. The ash around their feet started to shimmer and shift, forming patterns that lasted only moments before dissolving back into formless gray. At first, Tochtli thought it was merely the wind playing tricks with the fine powder. But gradually, the patterns became more distinct, more purposeful. Feathers. The ash was forming the shapes of feathers. "Do you see them?" Xochitla whispered, her young voice filled with wonder and fear. All around them, the ash road was coming alive with ghostly plumes, some large as eagle feathers, others tiny as those of wrens. They appeared and vanished like memories half recalled, their gray forms dancing in the still air before settling back into the undifferentiated dust of the road. "The warrior's feathers," Nikali said, his usually stern voice softened by awe. "They wore them into battle as symbols of courage and honor. Even in death, even reduced to ash, they remember their purpose." As the merchants continued their careful progress along the road, the phantom feathers grew more numerous, more vivid. Some seemed to glow with their own inner light, while others appeared solid enough to touch. Tochtli found himself reaching toward one, a magnificent plume that might have adorned a war chief's headdress, but his fingers passed through it as if it were made of smoke and shadow. "They're trying to tell us something," he said, watching as the feathers began to form more complex patterns around their feet. Look, they're not random. They're making shapes, symbols. Indeed, the ash feathers were arranging themselves into glyphs and pictographs, creating a story written in the language of the dead. Tochtli saw images of warriors marching beneath banners of brilliant plumes, of battles fought with weapons adorned with sacred feathers, of young men who believed their courage would carry them to glory. But the story the feathers told was not one of triumph. As the merchants walked deeper into the valley, the ash images showed the warriors' final moments, how they had been caught in a supernatural storm, how the very air had turned against them, how they had fallen not to enemy spears, but to the wrath of gods they had somehow offended. They died dreaming of home. Itzcua said softly, reading the ash-written tale with eyes that had seen too much of the world's sorrow. See how the feathers cluster around images of families, of children, of the villages they left behind. Their last thoughts were not of glory or conquest, but of the simple joys they would never see again. As if responding to her words, the ash around them began to swirl more violently, forming shapes that were almost human, ghostly figures that seemed to reach toward the living merchants with desperate longing. The temperature dropped suddenly, and Tochtli felt the hair on his arms rise as an otherworldly presence pressed close around them. "They want to go home," he said, understanding flooding through him like cold water. "They've been trapped here for centuries, unable to find their way back to the world of the living." Without thinking, he reached into his transformed cloak and withdrew a handful of feathers. Real feathers, warm with life and bright with color. As he scattered them onto the ash road, something extraordinary happened. The phantom feathers began to merge with the real ones, gaining substance and weight, transforming from memory into reality. The other merchants followed his example, each contributing feathers from their own cloaks. As the living plumes mixed with the ghostly ones, the ash road began to glow with soft phosphorescence. The trapped spirits of the warriors stirred, their forms becoming more distinct, more human. One by one, they began to rise from the gray earth, not as the broken corpses they had become, but as they had been in life, young and proud and beautiful. Their ash-gray forms were adorned with feathers that blazed with all the colors of the living world, and their faces held expressions of wonder and gratitude. "Thank you," their voices whispered like wind through dry leaves. "Thank you for giving us wings to carry us home." As the merchants watched in amazement, the ghostly warriors began to transform. Their human forms dissolved into clouds of luminous ash that swirled upward, carried by winds that seemed to come from the realm of the gods themselves. But as they rose, the ash took on new shapes, the forms of birds, hundreds of them. Their wings spread wide as they soared toward the distant mountains where their villages had once stood. The transformation continued until the last of the warriors had taken flight, leaving behind an ash road that was no longer gray and lifeless but rich and dark, ready to nurture new growth. Already, Tochtli could see tiny green shoots pushing through the transformed earth, the first signs of life returning to this place of ancient sorrow. "It is done," Itzcua said, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "The warriors have found their way home at last, and the valley can begin to heal." As they continued along the road, now soft and fertile beneath their feet, Tochtli felt a profound sense of completion. They had not simply passed through this place, they had transformed it, had used their gifts as feather merchants to heal an ancient wound in the world itself. Behind them, The Valley of Fallen Warriors was already beginning to bloom. Flowers pushed through the rich earth, their petals the same colors as the feathers that had given the dead warriors their freedom. And in the distance, barely visible against the sky, a flock of birds circled once before disappearing over the mountains, carrying with them the dreams and hopes of those who had finally found their way home. The rain began to fall as they reached the valley's edge, not the harsh downpour of a storm, but the gentle precipitation that comes when the sky weeps tears of joy. Each drop that touched the transformed earth brought forth new life, new growth, new hope for the future. And in his cloak, Tochtli felt the phantom feathers that had chosen to remain with him, their ghostly presence a reminder that some gifts transcend the boundary between life and death, between memory and reality, between the world of flesh and the realm of eternal dreams. Chapter 14. The Bird That Returned from the Stars. The meteor shower began at midnight, painting the sky with streaks of silver fire that seemed to write messages in a language older than words. Tochtli lay on his sleeping mat, watching the celestial display through the canopy of a grove where they had made camp, each falling star reflected in his wide eyes like captured lightning. The merchants had been traveling for 3 days since leaving the transformed Valley of Fallen Warriors, following a path that wound ever upward through pine forests that smelled of resin and ancient secrets. The air had grown thin and cold, and their breath formed small clouds that dissipated quickly in the mountain wind. "Look there," Chitlali whispered, pointing toward the eastern horizon where the meteors seemed most numerous. "It's as if the stars themselves are falling to earth." But even as she spoke, something extraordinary happened. One of the falling stars, larger and brighter than the rest, suddenly changed course. Instead of continuing its downward arc toward the distant mountains, it began to slow, to circle, to descend with the deliberate grace of a bird coming to roost. As it drew closer, its true nature became apparent. It was indeed a bird, but unlike any creature that had ever flown in earthly skies. Its body was translucent, as if carved from crystallized starlight, and its wings seemed to be made of the aurora itself, sheets of shimmering color that shifted from green to blue to violet with each beat. Where ordinary birds had feathers, this celestial visitor bore plumes that looked like captured comets, each one trailing wisps of cosmic fire. The starbird settled on a branch directly above their camp, its weight causing the pine needles to chime like tiny bells. When it folded its wings, the aurora light dimmed but did not disappear entirely, creating a soft glow that illuminated the grove with otherworldly radiance. "Eakatsin, preserve us," Nakali breathed, his weathered face filled with awe. "It's a messenger from the realm beyond the sky." The merchants rose slowly, their movements careful and reverent. This was clearly no ordinary encounter. The appearance of a starbird was mentioned in only the most ancient texts, spoken of in whispers by the eldest traders who claimed to have heard the stories from their great-grandmothers' great-grandmothers. Itzel stepped forward, her hands forming the gesture of deepest respect. "Honored one," she said, her voice carrying the formal cadence reserved for addressing the divine. "We are humble servants of the feather paths. What message do you bring from the celestial realm?" The starbird tilted its head, studying them with eyes that held the depth of infinite space. When it spoke, its voice was like the music of the spheres, harmonious, otherworldly, beautiful beyond description. "And I bring greetings from those who have chosen the sky," it said, each word accompanied by tiny sparkles of stardust that drifted from its beak. "From Itzcua, who swims now in the lake of all waters that exists between the stars. from the warriors you freed, who soar as eagles in the realm where all battles are won through beauty rather than blood. From all who have crossed the threshold and found their true forms in the endless dance of wing and wind. Tochtli felt his heart leap at the mention of Itzcua. Their lost companion was not truly lost, then, but transformed, existing in a realm where his love of water had found its ultimate expression. But I come also with a warning," the starbird continued, its aurora wings rustling with sounds like distant thunder. "The path ahead grows treacherous. You approach the cloud forest, where the boundary between earth and sky grows thin as spider silk. There, choices will be made that cannot be unmade. Transformations will be offered that cannot be refused by those whose hearts have already begun to sprout wings." The celestial messenger's gaze fixed on Tochtli, and he felt as if those star-filled eyes could see directly into his soul. "Especially you, young dreamer. The feathers you wear sing with the voices of earth and sky, dream and waking, human and bird. You stand at the crossroads of becoming, and the choice you make will echo through all the realms of existence." "What choice?" Tochtli asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "To remain bound to flesh and earth, carrying the dreams of flight but never achieving them. Or to surrender your human form and become what you have always been in your deepest heart. A bridge between worlds, a creature of air and starlight, free to soar among the celestial spheres." The starbird spread one wing, and from its aurora feathers fell a single plume that landed at Tochtli's feet. Unlike the bird's other feathers, this one was solid, real, warm to the touch. It pulsed with gentle light and seemed to hum with barely contained energy. "This is a star feather," the celestial messenger explained. "It carries within it the essence of transformation, the power to change what is into what could be. Keep it safe, young dreamer. When the moment of choice arrives, you will know what to do." As Tochtli bent to pick up the feather, he felt a shock of recognition run through him. This was the same energy he had sensed in the grove of hanging feathers, the same power that had transformed his cloak when he healed the deer, the same force that had freed the trapped warriors from their ash-bound prison. "The ceremony must be prepared," Itzcua said suddenly, her ancient voice filled with urgency. "If a starbird has come to us, if the star feather has been given, then we must perform the ritual of celestial welcome. It has been generations since such an honor was granted to mortal merchants." Working quickly, the merchants gathered materials for the ceremony: pine boughs for the sacred fire, water from a hidden spring for purification, and feathers from their own cloaks for the offering circle. As they worked, the starbird watched with patient interest, its presence filling the grove with an atmosphere of profound sanctity. When the preparations were complete, they formed a circle around the fire, their feather cloaks rustling in the mountain wind. The starbird descended from its perch to stand in the circle's center, its aurora wings spread wide, casting shifting patterns of colored light across their faces. "Yeah, we dance the star feather dance," Itzcua announced, beginning to move in the slow, graceful steps that had been passed down through countless generations of feather merchants. "We honor the messenger from beyond the sky, and we celebrate the gift of transformation that has been offered to one of our own." The dance was unlike anything Tochtli had ever experienced. As the merchants moved in their ancient patterns, their feather cloaks began to glow with the same aurora light as the starbird's wings. The very air seemed to thicken with magic, and for moments at a time, Tochtli could swear that his feet left the ground entirely, that he was dancing not on earth but on currents of pure starlight. The starbird joined the dance, its movements creating spirals of cosmic fire that painted temporary constellations in the air above them. As it danced, it sang, not in words, but in pure music that spoke directly to the soul, telling stories of worlds beyond counting, of creatures that existed as pure thought and energy, of the vast, beautiful loneliness of the spaces between stars. When the dance finally ended, the starbird spread its wings one final time and began to rise, its form growing translucent as it ascended toward the meteor shower that still painted the sky with silver fire. Remember, its voice echoed from the heights. The choice approaches. Be ready, young dreamer. Be ready to become what you have always been. As the celestial messenger disappeared among the falling stars, the grove fell silent, except for the whisper of wind through pine needles and the soft crackling of their dying fire. But the star feather in Tochtli's hand continued to pulse with gentle light, a reminder that some gifts come from realms so distant that their very existence changes the nature of what is possible. That night, as he lay beneath the star-filled sky, with the star feather carefully wrapped and placed next to his heart, Tochtli dreamed of flying among the meteors, his human form dissolved into pure light and motion. And in his dream, he heard the starbird's song echoing across the cosmic distances, calling him toward a transformation that would either fulfill his deepest longings or destroy everything he had ever been. Chapter 15. Songs Hidden in Feathers. The discovery came by accident, as the most profound revelations often do. They had stopped to rest beside a mountain stream, its waters singing as they tumbled over smooth stones worn by countless seasons of flow. Xochitla was adjusting her feather cloak when a gust of wind caught the edge, lifting it toward the small fire they had built to warm their evening meal. As the feathers passed near the flames, something extraordinary happened. They began to sing. Not the rustle of wind through plumes that they had heard before, but actual music, haunting melodies that seemed to rise from the very heart of each feather. The sound was so unexpected, so beautiful, that all conversation stopped. The merchant sat in stunned silence as Xochitla slowly moved her cloak closer to the fire, coaxing more songs from the dancing flames. "By all the gods," Nikali whispered, his weathered face illuminated by firelight and wonder. "The feathers are singing memories." Each type of feather produced its own unique melody. The Quetzal plumes sang in deep, resonant tones that spoke of ancient forests and the wisdom of trees. Hummingbird feathers created delicate, rapid trills that captured the essence of flowers dancing in morning light. The macaw feathers added bold, bright notes that painted the air with colors of sunset and celebration. But it was more than just music. As Tochtli listened, he began to understand that each song carried within it the memories of the bird that had once worn the feather. He heard the joy of first flight, the contentment of a successful hunt, the fierce protectiveness of a parent defending its nest. The feathers were not just beautiful ornaments. They were repositories of lived experience, libraries of avian memory preserved in keratin and dream. "Try yours," Itzcua urged, her ancient eyes bright with excitement. "Let us hear what songs your cloak has gathered." With trembling hands, Tochtli lifted the edge of his transformed cloak toward the fire. The response was immediate and overwhelming. His feathers didn't just sing, they created a symphony. The deer's dreams of running and leaping wove through melodies of flight and freedom. The phantom feathers from the ash road added harmonies of redemption and release. And threading through it all, the star feather pulsed with music that seemed to come from the very heart of the cosmos. But there was something else, something that made Tochtli's breath catch in his throat. Hidden within the complex tapestry of sound was a melody he recognized, the simple, pure song of the house wren whose feather he had offered at the stone gate. It sang of home and safety, of morning light streaming through familiar windows, of the comfort found in small, everyday joys. Each feather remembers, Itzcua said softly, her own cloak now singing near the fire. Not just the bird it came from, but every moment of significance in its existence. The day it first caught the wind, the storms it weathered, the sunlight it basked in, the final moment when it was given freely to become part of something greater. As the evening progressed, the merchants experimented with their discovery, learning to coax different songs from their feathers by varying the distance from the flames, the angle of approach, even the emotions they held in their hearts as they listened. They found that feathers from birds that had lived in flocks sang in harmony, while those from solitary species preferred solo melodies. Feathers from young birds created bright, optimistic tunes, while those from ancient creatures sang with the weight of accumulated wisdom. But why can we hear them now? Xochitla asked, her young voice filled with wonder. We've had fires before. We've worn our cloaks near flames. Why do the songs reveal themselves tonight? Tochtli thought he knew the answer. Because we're ready to listen, he said, his fingers gently stroking the star feather that pulsed against his chest. Because we've learned to hear with more than our ears, to understand with more than our minds. The songs were always there. We just needed to become the kind of people who could perceive them. As if to confirm his words, the star feather began to sing on its own, without need of fire or wind. Its melody was unlike anything they had heard before, a song that seemed to contain all songs, a harmony that encompassed every possible note and rhythm. It spoke of the music that underlies all existence, the cosmic symphony that plays eternally in the spaces between heartbeats, between thoughts, between one moment and the next. The song of all songs. Itzcua breathed, her face pale with awe. The melody that the first gods sang when they dreamed the world into existence. I thought it was just a legend. But as they listened to the star feather's impossible music, other sounds began to join it. The stream beside their camp started to harmonize with the cosmic melody, its babbling transformed into liquid music. The wind in the pine trees added its voice, creating percussion from the rustle of needles and the creak of branches. Even the crackling of their fire seemed to find its place in the growing symphony. And then, from somewhere in the darkness beyond their camp, came the sound of wings. Not the physical beating of feathers against air, but the spiritual essence of flight itself. The music that birds make when they soar, not just through sky, but through the realm of pure possibility. They're coming, Tochtli said, though he couldn't explain how he knew. All of them. Every bird whose feather we carry, every creature whose song we've learned to hear. They're coming to join the symphony. Indeed, shapes began to materialize at the edge of their firelight, not solid birds, but the spiritual essence of avian life. Ghostly quetzals with wings that spanned impossible distances, phantom hummingbirds that moved like living jewels, spectral eagles that soared on thermals of pure music. They came not to reclaim their feathers, but to celebrate the songs that had been preserved within them. As the night deepened, the merchants found themselves no longer simply listening to the music. but becoming part of it. Their own voices joined the chorus, not in words, but in pure sound that expressed emotions too deep for language. They sang of their journeys, their discoveries, their growing understanding of the mysteries that connected all living things. Tochtli felt his voice weaving through the cosmic symphony, adding his own small melody to the vast composition. But as he sang, he became aware of something else, a choice that was approaching, a moment when he would have to decide whether to remain a listener to the song of all songs or to become one of its eternal performers. The star feather pulsed against his chest, its music growing stronger, more insistent. It was calling to him, offering him the chance to join the cosmic chorus permanently, to become a creature of pure song and starlight. All he had to do was surrender his human form, let go of his earthbound existence, and step into the realm where music and meaning were one and the same. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight was for listening, for learning, for gathering the songs into his heart, like a collection of precious gems. The choice would come soon enough, in the cloud forest, where the boundary between earth and sky grew thin as morning mist. As dawn approached, and the phantom birds began to fade back into the realm of spirit, the merchants carefully collected the songs they had heard, breathing them into the dream catcher pouches they carried. Each melody was preserved like a pressed flower, ready to be released when the time was right. And in his transformed cloak, Tochtli felt the new songs settling among the feathers like seeds waiting for the proper season to bloom. He was no longer simply a merchant who traded in beautiful objects. He had become a keeper of music, a guardian of the songs that connected all living things to the eternal symphony that played at the heart of existence. The fire burned low as the sun rose, but the music lingered in the air around them, a reminder that some discoveries change not just what we know, but who we are capable of becoming. Chapter 16. The Memory of the Feather Tree. The glade appeared without warning, hidden behind a curtain of morning mist that parted like silk as the merchants approached. One moment, they were walking through dense pine forest, their feet crunching on fallen needles. The next, they stood at the edge of a circular clearing where a single tree grew in perfect solitude. But what a tree it was! Its trunk rose straight and tall as a temple pillar, its bark silver white and smooth as polished bone. And instead of leaves, its branches bore feathers, thousands upon thousands of them, each one unique, each one moving with its own gentle rhythm in the still air of the glade. The feather tree, Itzcua whispered, her voice filled with reverence and something that might have been longing. I thought it was just a legend, a story told to comfort merchants who had been too long away from home. The tree's feathers were unlike any Tochtli had ever seen. Some were familiar, the brilliant green of quetzals, the ruby red of cardinals, the iridescent shimmer of hummingbirds. But others belonged to no earthly species, their colors shifting and changing like captured aurora, their forms suggesting birds that existed only in the realm of dreams and possibility. As they drew closer, Tochtli began to understand the tree's true nature. The feathers weren't growing from the branches. They were memories made manifest, each one representing a moment of profound homesickness experienced by a feather merchant far from the place of their birth. The tree fed on longing, grew strong on the tears of those who had traveled too far and seen too much to ever truly return to the innocence of home. It only appears to those who need it most, said a voice from behind them. The merchants turned to see an old woman emerging from the mist, her hair white as cloud, and her eyes the deep blue of distant mountains. She wore a simple huipil woven from cotton so fine it seemed to be made of captured moonbeams, and around her shoulders hung a cloak of feathers that pulsed with gentle light. "I am Xochitla," she said, though Tochtli recognized the name as belonging to the goddess of love and beauty, of flowers and birds and all things that brought joy to the heart. "I am the keeper of this place, the guardian of memories that have grown too heavy for mortal hearts to carry." She gestured toward the tree, and as she did, some of the feathers began to glow more brightly, as if responding to her presence. Each feather holds the memory of home as it existed in a merchant's heart at the moment of deepest longing. Not home as it truly was, but home as it was remembered, perfect, unchanging, forever bathed in the golden light of childhood. Tochtli felt a tightness in his chest as he looked at the tree. Already, he could feel his own homesickness stirring, the ache for familiar faces and familiar places that he had been carrying without fully acknowledging. The small room where he had slept as a child, the sound of his mother's voice calling him to morning meal, the way the light fell through the window of his family's modest dwelling, all of it seemed suddenly precious beyond measure. "Why do you show us this?" Nikali asked, his weathered face creased with pain. "Why make us feel what we have tried so hard to leave behind?" Xochitla smiled with infinite compassion. "Because the journey you are on requires a choice, and that choice cannot be made with a divided heart. You must decide what you truly value, the call of the sky or the pull of the earth, the freedom of transformation or the comfort of belonging." She walked to the base of the tree and placed her hand on its silver bark. Immediately, the feathers began to sing, not the cosmic symphony they had heard the night before, but something simpler, more intimate. Lullabies that mothers sang to sleepy children, work songs that farmers hummed in their fields, the gentle melodies of everyday life, of ordinary moments made precious by memory and distance. "Listen," Xochitla said softly. "Listen to what you are being asked to leave behind." One by one, the merchants approached the tree, drawn by the pull of their own memories. Chitlali was the first to touch the silver bark, and immediately a feather appeared among the branches, a small, brown plume that pulsed with warm light. As it settled into place, Tochtli heard the echo of a young girl's laughter, the sound of children playing in a village square while their parents watched with fond eyes. Nikali followed, his hand trembling as it touched the tree. His feather was larger, darker, marked with the stern beauty of a hawk. But the memory it carried was surprisingly gentle. The feeling of his father's hand on his shoulder, the pride in an older man's eyes as he watched his son take his first steps on the feather paths. Each merchant added their own memory to the tree, their own moment of perfect homesickness transformed into a feather that would grow forever in this hidden glade. Some wept as they touched the bark, overwhelmed by the intensity of their longing. Others smiled, finding comfort in the knowledge that their love for home would be preserved here, safe from the changes that time inevitably brings. When it came to Tochtli's turn, he hesitated. To touch the tree meant acknowledging what he would be giving up if he chose transformation, meant facing the full weight of what it would cost to become something more than human. But Xochitla's eyes were kind, and he knew that this too was part of his journey. His hand touched the silver bark, and immediately he was transported back to his childhood home. He saw his mother weaving at her loom, her fingers moving with practiced grace as she created patterns that told stories of gods and heroes. He heard his father's voice explaining the mysteries of the feather trade, the reverence in his tone as he spoke of the sacred trust between merchant and bird. He felt the warmth of his family's love surrounding him, like a protective cloak, keeping him safe from all the dangers of the world. The feather that appeared for him was small and unremarkable, the gray-brown plume of a house wren, identical to the one he had offered at the stone gate. But it carried within it all the comfort of home, all the security of belonging to a place and a people who would always welcome him back. As his memory feather settled among the branches, Tochtli felt something shift within him. The homesickness was still there, but it no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it had become a gift, a reminder of what he carried with him wherever he went, a source of strength that no transformation could take away. "Now you understand," Xochitla said, her voice gentle as falling rain. "Home is not a place you can lose by leaving it. It is something you carry within you, something that becomes part of who you are. Whether you choose the earth or the sky, whether you remain human or become something else entirely, the love that shaped you will always be part of your essence." As they prepared to leave the glade, each merchant carrying within them a deeper understanding of what they valued most, Xochitla offered them a final gift. From her own cloak, she plucked a single feather, one that seemed to contain all colors and no color, that shifted between visibility and transparency like a fragment of captured dream. "This is the feather of remembrance," she said, placing it in Tochtli's hands. "It will help you remember who you are, no matter what you choose to become. Keep it close to your heart, young dreamer. The greatest transformations are not those that change us into something entirely new, but those that help us become more fully ourselves." As they walked away from the feather tree, Tochtli looked back once to see it shimmering in the morning light, its memory feathers dancing in a breeze that seemed to carry the whispered voices of all who had ever loved and been loved in return. The tree would remain here always, growing stronger with each merchant who found the courage to acknowledge their deepest longings, a living testament to the truth that some things are too precious to ever truly leave behind. Chapter 17. Return through the Cave of Dreams. The cave mouth yawned before them, like the entrance to another world, its edges wreathed in mist that seemed to move with purpose rather than wind. The opening was perfectly circular, carved by no earthly force, and the darkness within held a quality that suggested depth beyond measurement. Not just physical distance, but layers of reality stacked one upon another like the pages of an infinite book. "This is the Cave of Dreams," Itzcua said, her voice carrying the weight of stories told and retold across generations. "The final passage before we reach the cloud forest. Here, the boundary between sleeping and waking dissolves entirely. We will see ourselves as we truly are, stripped of all pretense and illusion." The mist that flowed from the cave's mouth was unlike any fog Tochtli had ever encountered. It didn't simply obscure vision, it transformed it, showing glimpses of things that existed in the spaces between thoughts, between heartbeats, between one breath and the next. As wisps of it touched his skin, he felt memories stirring that weren't quite his own, dreams that belonged to other times, other lives. "Stay close," Nikali warned, his usually stern voice softened by uncertainty. In the Cave of Dreams, it's easy to lose yourself in visions that feel more real than reality. Remember who you are. Remember why you're here. They entered the cave in single file, their feather cloaks rustling softly in the strange, still air. The moment they crossed the threshold, the world changed. The stone walls around them began to shimmer and shift, showing not the rough rock of a natural cave, but scenes from their own lives, moments of joy and sorrow, triumph and failure, love and loss. Tochtli saw himself as a small child, chasing butterflies in his family's garden while his mother watched with fond eyes. He saw his first glimpse of the silent market, the wonder and fear that had filled him as he witnessed the ancient dance of the feather merchants. He saw the deer he had healed, bounding away into the desert dawn with his dreams woven into her very being. But the visions weren't limited to his own memories. As they walked deeper into the cave, the mist began to show him scenes from other lives, other times. He saw the first feather merchants, beings who were neither fully human nor fully bird, learning to walk the paths between worlds. He saw great cities that had risen and fallen, their people's dreams of flight preserved in the feathers they had worn and treasured. "Look," Xochitla whispered, pointing to a section of wall where the mist had formed into the shape of a vast tree. "It's the feather tree, but different." Indeed, the vision showed the tree not as they had seen it in the hidden glade, but as it had been in the beginning, a sapling growing from the tears of the first merchant who had ever felt the pull of home while walking the night paths. They watched as it grew over centuries, fed by the longing of countless travelers, until it became the magnificent repository of memory they had encountered. The deeper they went, the more personal the visions became. Tochtli found himself confronting moments from his childhood that he had forgotten or chosen not to remember. Times when he had felt different from other children, when he had dreamed of flying so vividly that he had woken with the sensation of wings folded against his back. "I always knew," he said aloud, his voice echoing strangely in the mist-filled passage. "Even as a small child, I knew I was meant for something else. I just didn't understand what." The cave seemed to respond to his words, the mist swirling more intensely around him. New visions formed, possible futures that branched out like the limbs of an enormous tree. In one, he saw himself returning to Tenochtitlan as a successful merchant, his cloak heavy with rare feathers, his family proud of his achievements. In another, he saw himself transformed into something between human and bird, soaring through skies that existed beyond the reach of mortal eyes. But there was a third vision, one that made his breath catch in his throat. He saw himself standing at the edge of a great precipice, the star feather glowing in his hand, faced with a choice that would determine not just his own fate, but the fate of all who walked the feather paths. In this vision, his decision would either preserve the ancient balance between earth and sky or shatter it forever. "The moment approaches," said a voice that seemed to come from the mist itself. "The choice that has been building since you first donned the feather cloak, since you first heard the call of wings in your dreams." Around him, the other merchants were having their own encounters with the cave's revelatory power. Nikali stood transfixed before a vision of his younger self, watching as the stern trader he had become slowly dissolved to reveal the frightened boy who had first left home to seek his fortune among the feather merchants. Xochitla wept as she saw herself in old age, her hair white as cloud, teaching a new generation of merchants the secrets she was only now beginning to learn. But it was Itzl's vision that drew Tochtli's attention most strongly. The ancient woman stood before a section of wall where the mist had formed into the shape of a great bird, the same celestial creature that had haunted his dreams since the beginning of his journey. But in this vision, the bird's face was clearly visible, and with a shock of recognition, Tochtli realized it was Itzl herself, transformed and transcendent, her human form dissolved into something vast and eternal. "You've already made your choice," he said, understanding flooding through him like cold water. "You're going to choose the sky." Itzl turned to him, her ancient eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to encompass all the sorrow of the world. "I have walked the feather paths for more years than you have drawn breath, young rabbit. I have seen wonders beyond counting, have learned secrets that would drive lesser minds to madness. But I have also felt the weight of flesh growing heavier with each passing season, have heard the call of the sky growing stronger with each beat of my aging heart." She gestured to the vision of her transformed self, the great bird that soared through realms beyond mortal comprehension. "This is what I am meant to become. What I have always been becoming, step by step, choice by choice, since the first day I donned a feather cloak and learned to listen to the songs of wings." The cave began to change around them, the mist growing thicker, more substantial. The visions on the walls started to move, to interact with each other, creating a tapestry of past, present, and future that was almost too complex for mortal minds to comprehend. "But the choice is not just mine to make," Itzcua continued, her voice growing distant as if she were already beginning to fade from the world of flesh. "The balance must be maintained. If I choose the sky, another must choose the earth. If I become a creature of air and starlight, another must remain to guide the next generation of merchants along the paths I will no longer walk." Tochtli felt the weight of her words settling into his bones like lead. The choice the oracle had foreseen, the decision that the starbird had warned him about. It wasn't just about his own transformation. It was about the continuation of the feather merchants themselves, about preserving the ancient balance that kept the pathways between worlds open and safe. As they reached the far end of the cave, where pale light filtered through an opening that led to the cloud forest beyond, Tochtli understood that his journey was nearing its end. Soon, very soon, he would have to decide not just what he wanted to become, but what the world needed him to be. The mist began to clear as they approached the exit, but the visions lingered in his mind like afterimages burned into his consciousness. He had seen himself as he truly was, not just a young merchant learning his trade, but a crucial link in an ancient chain, a guardian of mysteries that stretched back to the very beginning of the world. And in his transformed cloak, the star feather pulsed with increasing intensity, as if it could sense that the moment of ultimate choice was finally at hand. Chapter 18. The Final Trade at Dawn. The village of Nepantla clung to the mountainside like a bird's nest woven from cloud and stone. Its houses were built into the living rock, their walls carved from the mountain itself, their roofs thatched with grasses that grew only in the thin air of the high peaks. Smoke rose from chimneys that seemed to pierce the very sky, and the sound of water echoed from hidden springs that had never known the touch of lowland streams. This was their destination, the last settlement before the cloud forest, the final place where earthbound merchants could trade with those who dwelt in the realm between mountain and sky. The villagers who emerged to greet them were unlike any people Tochtli had ever seen, their skin pale as morning mist, their hair the color of silver clouds, their eyes holding depths that seemed to reflect not the world around them, but some inner landscape of dream and memory. "I welcome children of the feather paths," said their leader, a woman whose age was impossible to determine. She might have been 30 or 300, her face bearing the timeless quality of those who lived close to the boundary between mortal and divine. "We have been expecting you. The dreams told us of your coming, of the choice that must be made before the sun reaches its zenith." The villagers led them to the center of their settlement, where a market had been prepared, unlike any Tochtli had ever seen. The stalls were carved from living crystal that caught and refracted the morning light into rainbow patterns that danced across the ground. The merchants who waited there were clearly not entirely human. Some bore feathers growing from their skin. Others had eyes that held the golden depth of birds of prey. Still others seemed to shift between human and avian form as the light changed around them. "Ah, these are the transformed," Itzcua explained, her voice filled with reverence. "Merchants who chose the sky in ages past, but retained enough connection to earth to serve as bridges between the worlds. They trade in things that have no names, in dreams made manifest, in the essence of flight itself." The goods displayed in the crystal stalls defied description. Bottles filled with liquid starlight that pulsed with its own inner rhythm. Cloaks woven from solidified wind that moved without breeze. Feathers that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their forms shifting between what was and what could be. And at the center of it all, a pool of water so still and clear it seemed like a window into the heart of eternity. "Sleeping water," the village leader explained, gesturing toward the pool. "Distilled from the dreams of those who have learned to fly while remaining rooted to earth. It preserves the essence of transformation, allowing those who drink it to carry the memory of flight, even if they choose to remain bound to flesh and bone." As the merchants began their final trade, Tochtli found himself drawn to one of the transformed, a being who had once been human but now bore wings of translucent crystal and eyes that held the depth of infinite sky. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through mountain peaks, beautiful and alien and infinitely sad. "You carry the star feather," it said, its gaze fixed on the pulsing light beneath Tochtli's cloak. "The catalyst of ultimate transformation. I carried one once, long ago, when I faced the same choice that now confronts you." "What did you choose?" Tochtli asked, though he could see the answer in the being's crystalline wings, in the way it seemed to exist partially in this world and partially in some other realm. "I chose the middle path," it replied. "Neither fully earth nor fully sky, but something between. I became a bridge, a guardian of the threshold, able to touch both worlds but belonging completely to neither. It is a lonely existence, but a necessary one." Around them, the other merchants were completing their trades, exchanging their earthly feathers for dream-infused plumes that would carry the essence of their journey back to the lowland markets. But Tochtli found himself unable to focus on the commerce, his attention drawn instead to the pool of sleeping water and the choice that awaited him. As the sun climbed higher, approaching its zenith, the village leader approached him with a crystal vial filled with the precious sleeping water. "This is for you," she said, her timeless eyes studying his face with gentle understanding. "Whether you choose earth or sky, transformation or preservation, you will need this to remember what you have learned, to carry the essence of your journey forward into whatever future awaits." Tochtli accepted the vial with trembling hands, feeling the weight of liquid dreams against his palm. The sleeping water was warm to the touch, pulsing with the same rhythm as his own heartbeat, as if it were somehow connected to the very essence of his being. "The moment approaches," Itzcua said, her ancient voice carrying a note of finality. "The sun reaches its peak, and the choice can no longer be delayed. What will it be, young rabbit? Earth or sky? Flesh or spirit? The preservation of what is or the embrace of what could be?" But before Tochtli could answer, a sound filled the air that made every creature in the village look up in wonder. It was the beating of vast wings, the approach of something so immense that its shadow darkened the entire settlement. The great bird of his dreams was descending from the heights, its form more magnificent and terrible than he had ever imagined. As it settled on the crystal platform at the village's heart, Tochtli saw that it was not one creature but many, a composite being formed from the spirits of all who had chosen the sky. Their individual essences merged into something vast and eternal and beautiful beyond description. The time has come. The great bird spoke, its voice containing multitudes. The choice that will determine not just your fate, but the fate of all who walk the paths between worlds. Choose wisely, young dreamer. Choose with your heart, but also with your wisdom. Choose for yourself, but also for all who will come after. The star feather in Tochtli's cloak began to glow with blinding intensity, its light visible even through the fabric that contained it. Around him, the transformed merchants, the crystal-pale villagers, and his own companions all waited in breathless silence for the decision that would echo through all the realms of existence. The sleeping water pulsed in his hands. The great bird watched with eyes that held the depth of eternity, and somewhere in the distance, the cloud forest waited with its promise of ultimate transformation or ultimate preservation. The choice could no longer be delayed. Chapter 19. The Feather Cloak of Tochtli. The moment stretched like a held breath, suspended between heartbeats, between worlds, between what was and what could be. Tochtli stood at the center of the crystal platform, the star feather blazing against his chest, the vial of sleeping water warm in his hands, while the great bird waited with infinite patience for his decision. But as he opened his mouth to speak, to make the choice that would determine his fate and the fate of all who walked the feather paths, something unexpected happened. The feathers of his cloak began to sing. Not the melodies they had discovered by the fire, not the cosmic symphony of the star feather, but something entirely new, a song that seemed to weave together every moment of his journey, every lesson learned, every transformation witnessed. The wren's feather sang of home and belonging. The deer's dreams added harmonies of healing and sacrifice. The phantom feathers from the ash road contributed notes of redemption and release. And threading through it all, the star feather pulsed with music that spoke of choices yet to be made. As the song grew stronger, the other merchants began to understand what was happening. This was not just music. It was a new kind of transformation, one that had never been seen before in all the long history of the feather paths. "He's not choosing," Xochitla whispered, her young voice filled with wonder. "He's creating something new." Indeed, as the cloak's song reached its crescendo, the feathers themselves began to change. They didn't lose their individual beauty or their unique memories, but they started to weave together in patterns that defied the laws of ordinary reality. The cloak was becoming something more than the sum of its parts, a living tapestry that contained not just the dreams of birds, but the dreams of all who had ever longed to bridge the gap between earth and sky. "I understand now," Tochtli said, his voice carrying clearly despite the music that surrounded him. The choice was never between earth and sky, between human and bird, between staying and going. The choice was whether to accept the boundaries that others have drawn, or to create something entirely new. He lifted the vial of sleeping water, its contents glowing with soft phosphorescence in the morning light. "I choose to become a keeper of dreams, a guardian of the paths between worlds. Not transformed into something else, but transformed into something more human, more connected, more able to help others find their own way between the realms of possibility." As he spoke, He poured the sleeping water over his cloak, and the transformation accelerated. The feathers began to glow with their own inner light, each one becoming a small star in a constellation of dreams. The cloak expanded, growing larger and more magnificent, until it seemed less like a garment and more like a living map of all the paths that connected the world of flesh to the realm of spirit. The great bird watched this unprecedented transformation with eyes that held surprise and approval in equal measure. "You have chosen a path that has never been walked before," it said, its voice containing the wonder of discovery. "You have become something new, not a bridge between worlds, but a weaver of worlds, one who can help others find their own unique paths to transformation." As the cloak settled into its new form, Tochtli felt the change within himself as well. He was still human, still connected to the earth and the people he loved, but he was also something more. He could feel the dreams of every creature that had ever longed for flight, could sense the paths that connected all living things to the vast web of possibility that surrounded them. "The Cloak of Dreams," Itzcua said, her ancient eyes bright with tears of joy. "The garment that was prophesied in the oldest texts, the one that would appear when the world needed a new kind of guide, a new kind of teacher." The transformed merchants gathered around Tochtli, their crystalline wings rustling with excitement. "You have given us something we thought was lost forever," one of them said. "Hope that there are still new paths to be discovered, new ways to grow and change and become." As the ceremony concluded and the merchants prepared for their return journey, Tochtli found himself changed in ways both subtle and profound. The cloak of dreams that he now wore was not just a garment, but a responsibility, a living reminder that transformation was not a destination, but a journey. Not a single choice, but a series of choices made with love and wisdom and hope. The great bird spread its vast wings and began to rise toward the sky, but before it disappeared into the heights, it spoke one final time. "You have chosen well, young dreamer. You have shown that the greatest transformations are not those that take us away from who we are, but those that help us become more fully ourselves." As they began their descent from the mountain village, Tochtli looked back once at the cloud forest that stretched beyond, its mists holding secrets and transformations yet to be discovered. He would return here someday, he knew, but not as a seeker of his own transformation. He would return as a guide, helping others find their own paths through the maze of possibility that connected all living things. The cloak of dreams rustled around his shoulders, its feathers singing softly of journeys yet to come, of dreams yet to be born, of the endless dance between what is and what could be. And in its music, he heard the promise that some transformations are not endings, but beginnings, not conclusions, but invitations to discover what wonders await those brave enough to weave new patterns in the fabric of reality itself. Chapter 20. The Silence That Sleeps Inside Feathers. The journey home passed like a dream half remembered upon waking. The merchants retraced their steps through landscapes that seemed somehow different now, touched by the magic of transformation and the weight of choices made. The ash road bloomed with flowers that sang in the wind. The Featherstone stood silent and proud, its carved names glowing softly in the moonlight. The owl ground echoed with the distant sound of wings, as if Itzcua's spirit soared somewhere in the spaces between sleeping and waking. But it was when they reached the outskirts of Tenochtitlan that Tochtli truly understood how much he had changed. The great city spread before them like a jeweled web, its pyramids reaching toward the star-scattered sky, its canals reflecting the light of countless torches. It was the same city he had left months ago, Yet everything about it seemed different, more vivid, more alive, more connected to the vast network of dreams and possibilities that he could now perceive. The other merchants dispersed to their own homes and families, carrying with them the memories of their journey and the knowledge that they had witnessed something unprecedented. Xochitla embraced him before she left, her young eyes bright with tears and wonder. "You've shown us that there are always new paths to discover," she said. "New ways to grow and change and become." Nikali clasped his shoulder with a weathered hand, his stern face softened by something that might have been pride. "You chose well, young rabbit," he said, using Itzcel's old nickname for him. "The world needs dreamers who can weave new realities from the threads of what is and what could be." But it was Itzcel's farewell that touched him most deeply. The ancient woman stood before him in the pre-dawn darkness, her own cloak shimmering with the light of approaching transformation. "This is where our paths diverge," she said, her voice carrying the weight of eternity. "I go now to join the great bird, to become part of the eternal dance of wing and wind. But you remain to guide others along the paths we have walked together." As she spoke, her form began to shimmer and fade, becoming translucent as morning mist. "Remember, young keeper of dreams, it is not feathers that bring sleep, but sleep that finds those who listen. Listen well, and help others learn to listen too." With those words, she dissolved into light and air, her essence joining the vast presence that soared somewhere beyond the reach of mortal eyes. But her wisdom remained, woven into the very fabric of the cloak of dreams that rustled softly around Tochtli's shoulders. Alone now, he made his way through the familiar streets of his childhood, past the market where he had first heard whispers of the feather merchants, past the temple where he had prayed for guidance before beginning his journey. Everything was the same, yet everything was different, seen now through eyes that had learned to perceive the connections that bound all living things together. His family's dwelling stood unchanged, its modest walls glowing softly in the light of the rising sun. But as he approached, he saw that someone was waiting for him, a small figure sitting in the doorway, wrapped in a cloak that seemed to be woven from captured starlight. It was a child, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with eyes that held depths far beyond their apparent age. As Tochtli drew closer, the child stood and made the gesture of respectful greeting, their small hands forming the sign of the sacred spiral. "I have been waiting for you," the child said, their voice carrying the musical quality of wind through feathers. "The dreams told me you would come, that you would teach me the paths between worlds." Tochtli smiled, understanding flooding through him like warm sunlight. This was why he had chosen as he had, why he had become a weaver of worlds rather than a creature of pure sky. Not to end his own journey, but to help others begin theirs. "What is your name, young dreamer?" he asked, settling beside the child in the doorway of his family's home. "Itzcel," the child replied, and Tochtli's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the ancient wisdom shining in those young eyes. "I dream of birds that sing with human voices, of feathers that carry the memories of the wind." As the sun rose fully above the horizon, painting the city in shades of gold and rose, Tochtli began to speak. He told the child of the silent market where merchants communicated through gestures, of the rivers that sang lullabies to those who knew how to listen, of the choices that awaited all who walked the paths between earth and sky. And as he spoke, his cloak of dreams rustled softly around them both, its feathers singing with voices that spoke of journeys yet to come, of transformations yet to be discovered, of the endless dance between what is and what could be. In the distance, barely audible on the morning breeze, came the sound of vast wings beating against the sky, the great bird that soared in the realm beyond mortal sight, carrying with it the spirits of all who had chosen the freedom of eternal flight. But here, in the doorway of a modest dwelling in the great city of Tenochtitlan, another kind of magic was beginning. The magic of teaching, the magic of sharing, the magic of helping others discover their own unique paths through the maze of possibility that connected all living things. As the child listened with rapt attention, Tochtli felt the truth of Itzl's final words settling into his heart like seeds waiting for the proper season to bloom. It was not feathers that brought sleep, but sleep that found those who had learned to listen, to the whispers of wind through plumes, to the songs that lived in silence, to the dreams that danced in the spaces between one heartbeat and the next. And in that listening, in that teaching, in that sharing of wonder and wisdom, the true magic of the feather merchants lived on, not in the transformation of the individual, but in the transformation of the world itself, one dreamer at a time, one story at a time, one feather at a time. The silence that slept inside feathers was not empty, but full of possibility, full of hope, full of the endless potential for growth and change and becoming that lived at the heart of all existence. And as the morning light grew stronger, painting the world in colors that had no names, Tochtli wrapped his cloak of dreams around both himself and the child, and began to teach the next generation of dreamers how to listen to the songs that only those with wings in their hearts could hear. The end. This concludes Aztec Feather Merchants Who Traveled at Night, a tale of transformation, choice, and the discovery that the greatest magic lies not in becoming something other than ourselves, but in becoming more fully who we are meant to be. Tochtli's journey from novice to dreamkeeper shows that some paths lead not to destinations, but to new beginnings, and that the most profound transformations are those that help us help others find their own way to wonder.